Welcome, welcome. You're here at Eclipse Wizardry. Today we present to you, Hermione and Daphne both kissed Harry after first task and their rival magics battled for his soul bond. Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 1, Aftermath. The dragon was dead. Not actually dead, the handlers had sedated it eventually, 3 of them working in desperate coordination while the crowd above roared themselves hoarse, but it was down, and Harry Potter was standing in the middle of the arena with singed robes, a bleeding forearm, and the golden egg tucked under his left arm like he'd just retrieved it from a slightly inconvenient shelf. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt like his heart was trying to escape through his ribcage. The noise hit him in waves, thousands of voices colliding into something that had no meaning, just weight. He could see the scoreboard but couldn't quite process the numbers. He could see the judges' table but couldn't make out faces. Everything had that particular quality of unreality that came after you'd almost died, where the world kept insisting it was still there but you hadn't quite caught up yet. Victor Crumb had gotten an 8 across the board. Cedric Diggory, 9 from 3 judges. Fleur Delacour, 7.5 average after her dragon set her skirt on fire. Harry's scores came up one at a time, 9, 9, 10, 8, 9. He didn't react. He was still breathing too deliberately for reactions. Ludo Bagman's amplified voice rolled over the arena like a carnival barker's dream. An extraordinary display from our youngest champion. Harry Potter takes the first task in joint first position with Mr. Diggory. The crowd's response was physical. Harry felt it in his chest. He started walking toward the exit tunnel and the noise followed him all the way down into the stone corridor beneath the stands, and then it was muffled, and then it was distant, and then it was just him and the torchlight and the echo of his own footsteps. He sat down against the stone wall. Just for a moment. Just until the shaking stopped. His hands were doing something embarrassing. He pressed them flat against his thighs and stared at the ceiling and concentrated on the specific reality of the cold stone floor through his robes, the specific weight of the egg in his lap, the specific smell of smoke and singed wool that was probably coming from him. Alive. Still alive. He'd been reasonably confident going in. The summoning charm had worked. The firebolt had come. The dragon, a Hungarian horntail, of course, naturally, because the universe had a sense of humor that Harry had stopped finding funny around age 8, had been slower in a straight line than it thought. The plan had worked. Plans working didn't stop your hands from shaking afterward. He heard footsteps. Fast ones, coming from the direction of the stand's entrance rather than the champion's preparation area, which meant someone had come around the outside rather than through the official route. He looked up. Hermione Granger came around the corner at something just below a run, her hair wild from the wind off the arena, her face doing 3 things at once, relief and anger and something raw that she hadn't had time to lock away. She was still wearing her Gryffindor scarf. Her cheeks were flushed from cold or terror or both. She stopped when she saw him. He started to say something, probably, "I'm fine," the reflexive armor, but she crossed the remaining distance between them in 4 quick steps and dropped to her knees in front of him on the stone floor and grabbed his face in both hands and kissed him. Not gently. Not tentatively. Like she needed confirmation of something that words weren't adequate for. Harry went completely still. It lasted maybe 4 seconds. Maybe 5. Her hands were warm against his face and she smelled like the library and cold air and her lips were, he wasn't thinking clearly, he'd just been nearly eaten by a dragon, this wasn't the moment for clear thinking, and then she pulled back. She was breathing hard. Her eyes were bright. "You complete and utter," she started, and her voice broke on the last word, which wasn't what she'd planned, clearly. She pressed her lips together. "Tried again. You could have died." "I didn't," Harry said. His voice came out remarkably steady, which seemed unfair given what was currently happening in his chest. "You were 50 feet up on a broomstick with a horntail snapping at your..." She stopped herself. Sat back on her heels. Looked at him with an expression he'd never seen on her face before, or maybe he had and never let himself look directly at it. "Are you hurt?" "Your arm, it's fine. Madame Pomfrey'll fix it in, Harry." "Yeah?" She looked at him for a long moment. The corridor was very quiet. Torchlight moved on the ceiling. "You were brilliant," she said. "Absolutely, stupidly brilliant." He let out a breath he'd been holding since roughly the moment the dragon had locked eyes on him. "Don't tell Ron I was brilliant. He'll never believe you anyway." Something in her face shifted, something complicated that she folded away before he could identify it. She stood, brushing stone dust off her knees, and pulled him to his feet with both hands, and for a moment they were standing very close together in the torchlight and neither of them moved. Then voices from the official entrance broke the moment into pieces, and Hermione stepped back, and the world reassembled itself into something more ordinary. "Madame Pomfrey," she said, in her organizing voice. "Now. That arm needs looking at." "Yes," Harry agreed, and followed her, and tried not to think about the extraordinary thing that had just happened in his chest, not the kissing, though that was certainly remarkable, but something underneath it. Something that had pulled, like a muscle he hadn't known existed. Like a door opening in a room he hadn't known was there. He filed it away. He was good at filing things away. The medical tent attached to the arena was organized chaos, Madame Pomfrey moving between stations with the efficiency of a battlefield surgeon, 2 Hogwarts students with minor burns from debris, a Beauxbatons girl with a twisted ankle. Harry sat on a cot at the far end and let his arm be examined. "Claws?" Pomfrey said, prodding the gash on his forearm with professional dispassion. "Tail, actually. I got too close on the second pass." "Hold still." She pointed her wand and muttered something that felt like cold water moving under his skin. The gash closed. The sting faded. "That'll be tender for 2 days. Keep it dry, no strenuous." She looked at his face and seemed to reconsider. "Do try to avoid getting bitten by anything else for the remainder of the week." "I'll do my best." She moved away. Harry sat on the cot and pressed his fingers to the inside of his wrist, where his pulse was doing something unsteady. The thing in his chest, the pull he'd felt when Hermione kissed him, it was still there. Quieter, but present. Like a vibration at the edge of hearing. He didn't have a framework for it. He set it aside in the same mental filing cabinet as the Dursleys make no sense, Dumbledore keeps secrets, being famous is exhausting, and Ron stopped speaking to me for 3 weeks and I'm apparently not supposed to talk about how much that hurt. The cabinet was getting full. The tent flap opened and Cedric Diggory ducked inside, still in his Triwizard champion's robes, looking considerably less scorched than Harry. He had the easy handsomeness that Harry associated with people who had never once been told their face was wrong, which wasn't a resentful observation, just an accurate one. "Potter." Cedric nodded at the empty cot across from him and sat when Harry nodded back. "Good run out there. That summoning charm, I wouldn't have thought of that." "You did brilliantly too," Harry said, because it was true. 9 from 3 judges. "You beat me on points." Cedric said it without the resentment Harry had half expected. "Just fact. I used a transfiguration, turned a rock into a dog, got the Horntail's attention off the egg. It worked but it wasn't clean." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Listen. I wanted to say, I believe you. That you didn't put your name in." Harry looked at him steadily. "I didn't." "I know." Cedric met his eyes. "I've been watching you since September. You haven't done a single thing that looks like someone running a publicity campaign. You look like someone who'd rather be literally anywhere else. That's not the face of a person who entered a death tournament for attention." Nice to hear someone say it plainly. Cho says the same. Cedric smiled briefly. "She thinks you're either very brave or very unlucky. Both, usually." Cedric laughed, a real one, genuine and unguarded. Harry found himself relaxing slightly. There was something uncomplicated about Cedric Diggory that was refreshing after months of everyone around him having 12 separate agendas. "Hufflepuff still giving you a hard time?" Cedric asked. "Less than they were. Your Badgers follow your lead pretty closely, you know." "Noted. I'll have a word." Cedric stood, adjusted his robes. "We should talk more, going into the second task." "Two heads. Two champions," Harry said. "Both of us trying not to get killed." Cedric held out his hand and Harry shook it. "I mean it, Potter. You did something extraordinary out there." He left. Harry sat alone in the tent for a moment, fingers still pressed to his wrist, feeling the strange vibration in his chest, and thought about extraordinary things. The feast that evening was celebratory in a way that Harry found difficult to sustain energy for. Gryffindor table was loud with the particular decibel level of people who needed to process adrenaline through noise. Fred and George had apparently started a betting pool on his survival and were cheerfully working out their winnings. Neville was telling someone that he'd known Harry would pull it off, which was not something Harry recalled Neville saying beforehand, but he let it go because Neville was earnest about it and that was its own kind of loyalty. Ron was there. That was the thing Harry noticed first. Ron was there, at the table, in his usual seat, watching Harry come in from the entrance hall with an expression that had traveled some distance from where it had been for the past 3 weeks. Ron started, when Harry sat down across from him. He stopped. Tried again. The summoning charm. That was properly good thinking, wasn't it? Harry looked at him. Ron's ears were going red. "Yeah," Harry said. "I should have," Ron began, and then didn't finish, and then finished anyway, because Ron Weasley was many things but a coward about his own feelings wasn't one of them when push actually came to shove. "I should have believed you. About not putting your name in. I was a prat." "Yeah," Harry said again. "You were." Ron winced. "Right. But you're here now." "I'm here now." Harry picked up his fork. "Good enough for me." Hermione, sitting 2 seats down, was looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone who wanted very badly to say something and was physically restraining herself. Harry caught her eye. Something passed between them, acknowledgement, warmth, something she folded away quickly and he let her. He was not going to think about the corridor. Not here. He ate. He let the noise wash over him. He answered Seamus's questions about the dragon and Dean's questions about the broomstick and Neville's question about whether the tail hurt worse than the claws. He didn't think about the pull in his chest or the vibration against his pulse or the way Hermione had looked at him in the torchlight. Mostly. It was late, 11, maybe later, when Harry gave up on sleep and took his invisibility cloak down to the lake. He went there when things needed sorting. The lake didn't ask questions. The giant squid had once surfaced while Harry stood on the bank at 2 in the morning during second year, regarded him with one vast eye, and submerged again without comment, which Harry had found more comforting than anything any human being had said to him that month. Tonight the water was black and very still. November had stripped the trees. The castle behind him was lit in the upper floors where prefects were doing their late rounds, and dark in the lower ones where sensible people slept. He wasn't wearing the cloak. He didn't feel like hiding tonight. He stood at the edge of the bank and turned the golden egg over in his hands and thought about nothing very carefully. He was so focused on thinking about nothing that he didn't hear her approach until she was 6 feet away. "Potter." He turned. Daphne Greengrass stood at the edge of the treeline, dressed in dark robes that had clearly been thrown over pajamas, her pale blonde hair loose around her shoulders. She looked like she'd walked out specifically and deliberately, not like someone who'd stumbled onto him by accident. There was intention in her posture even in the dark, even at 11 at night with the wind off the lake making her hair move. He'd spoken maybe 40 words to Daphne Greengrass in 4 years. He knew her by reputation, the Ice Queen of Slytherin, they called her, which was the kind of title people gave a girl who refused to perform warmth on demand. He knew she was clever, top 5 in their year by any measure, and that she came from old blood with the particular stillness that old blood sometimes produced, the sense of someone who had learned very early that showing your hand was a choice, not a reflex. He didn't know why she was here. "Greengrass," he said. "I watched your task today," she said. She didn't move closer yet. "I've been watching all 4 champions. Crumb is technically superior. Diggory is safer. Delacour is elegant." She paused. "You're none of those things." "Thanks," Harry said. "What you are," she continued, unhurried, "is effective. There's a difference." She came forward then, 2 steps, 3, stopping a reasonable arm's length away. Up close, her eyes were very blue and very direct, the kind of direct that came from practice. "You don't move like someone who knows what he's doing. You move like someone who's committed to doing it anyway. That's rarer." Harry looked at her steadily. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," she said, and something in her voice shifted, became less measured, "I watched you on that broomstick and I realized I've been watching you for 4 years without saying a single honest thing, and I decided that was a waste." "A waste," he repeated. "Of time. Yours and mine." She was close enough now that he could see the wind moving her hair, could see the deliberate steadiness of her breathing. "I'm going to do something now, and I want you to know it isn't impulsive." "Okay," Harry said, "because what else did you say to that?" Daphne Greengrass put her hand against his jaw, cool, deliberate, certain, and kissed him. It was different from Hermione's kiss the way winter was different from autumn. Hermione had kissed him like she was terrified and angry and relieved all at once, and it had been warm and desperate and over before either of them could think about it. Daphne kissed him with complete awareness of what she was doing. There was no desperation in it, no relief, just intention, and something underneath the intention that was very warm indeed, and the distant sound of the lake moving against the bank. She stepped back. Her face was composed. Only her eyes gave anything away. "I've wanted to do that since 3rd year," she said. "I'm not in the habit of wanting things I don't eventually do." Harry was quiet for a moment. The vibration in his chest, the one from the corridor, the one from Hermione's kiss, it had happened again. The same pull. The same door opening. But it felt different, somehow, the same room but different walls, same light through different windows. Harry started, and stopped, and started again. "That's a lot to say at 11 at night by a lake." "I know." Something that might have been a smile moved across her face. "I find night better for honesty. Fewer witnesses to the aftermath. Greengrass, Daphne." She said it simply. "If you've just been kissed by someone, you should probably use their first name." "Daphne." He tried it. It sat strangely, like wearing a different coat. "What is this, exactly? What do you want from this?" She looked at him for a long moment, and he got the sense she was deciding how much honesty to trade. "I want to know you," she said finally. "The real version. Not the prophet's boy who lived, not Gryffindor's poster child, not the reluctant champion. You. Whatever that is." A pause. "I suspect it's more interesting than anyone's bothered to find out." Harry looked at her. Really looked at her, the way he'd rarely looked at Slytherins without suspicion armed and ready, and found, under the composed surface and the very blue eyes and the careful words, something that felt surprisingly like honesty. "I don't know what the real version looks like," he said. It came out more truthful than he'd intended. "Good," Daphne said. "That means we'd both be discovering it." She held his gaze for one more moment, the kind of moment that had weight to it, that would have consequence, and then she turned and walked back toward the castle with the same deliberate quiet she'd arrived with, her dark robes disappearing into the shadow of the tree-line. Harry stood at the edge of the lake for a long time after that. The vibration in his chest wasn't quiet anymore. It had resolved into something with more definition, two distinct notes, low and warm, pulling in slightly different directions. He pressed his hand flat against his sternum and felt his own heartbeat, and underneath it, faint but unmistakable, something that wasn't just his heartbeat. Something that was, impossibly, two heartbeats. Both slightly different from his own. Both new. "What?" Harry said quietly to the lake. The lake didn't answer. The giant squid, wherever it was, kept its counsel. Harry stood there until the castle bell struck midnight, and then he walked back inside with the golden egg under one arm and two foreign heartbeats living in his chest, and he told himself that he would figure it out tomorrow and knew, with the bone-deep certainty of someone who'd had this kind of thing before, that whatever it was wasn't going to wait that long. He was in the hospital wing by 1 in the morning. Not by choice, Hermione, who apparently did not sleep in November, found him sitting on the stairs outside the dormitory with his robes soaked through with cold sweat, and she took one look at his face and said, in a voice that permitted no argument whatsoever, "Madame Pomfrey." "Now." "I'm fine," Harry said, because it was automatic. "Your hands are shaking and your temperature is." She pressed the back of her hand to his forehead and her eyes went sharp. "Harry, you're burning up." "I feel cold." "That's not the reassurance you think it is, come on." Madame Pomfrey took one look at him and had him in a bed within 30 seconds. She took his temperature 3 times with different instruments, each time looking more like someone solving a puzzle they didn't expect to be interesting. His temperature read 103 and then 101 and then 104, changing with each measurement. "That's not possible," Pomfrey said, to herself rather than to Harry, in the tone of a woman encountering the impossible with professional skepticism. "Story of my life," Harry said. "Hush." She pointed her wand at his chest and the diagnostic spell came out gold and then shifted to a deep violet that made her go very still. She tried it again. The same violet. She looked at it for a long moment. "What is it?" Hermione asked from the doorway, where she'd apparently refused to leave. "Miss Granger, you should, what is it, please?" Hermione asked again, and Pomfrey, who clearly recognized the specific stubbornness of a very competent witch who was not going anywhere, made a sound of resignation. "I'm not certain," she said carefully, which Harry suspected meant she had a very good idea and was choosing her words. "There are some readings here that suggest, I need to consult with Professor Dumbledore." "It's 1 in the morning," Harry said. "Yes, I'm aware." She tucked him in with the efficiency of someone who'd managed 1,000 beds, pressing a cooling potion into his hand. "Drink that. I'll be back within the half hour." "Miss Granger, I'll stay with him," Hermione said firmly. Pomfrey gave her a look that was 2/3 professional disapproval and 1/3 the specific respect one capable woman gives another when neither has time for performances. She left. Harry drank the potion. The fever shifted, didn't drop, exactly, but changed quality, became less frantic. He lay back against the pillow and looked at the hospital wing ceiling, which he knew very well. Hermione sat in the chair beside his bed. She was very quiet, which was unusual for her variety of concern. Usually concern came with information. She would tell him 3 things and 2 preventative measures and a historical context, but right now she was just sitting, her hands folded in her lap, watching his face. "Are you going to ask me how I feel?" Harry said. "I know how you feel. Terrible. Then are you going to tell me what a diagnostic violet means?" A pause. "I'm not sure exactly. But violet on a magical diagnostic usually indicates an external magical influence. Something that's interacting with someone's natural core." Harry considered this. The 2 heartbeats were still there, steady and low and deeply, fundamentally other. He pressed his fingers to his sternum and felt them. "Hermione," he said. Earlier. In the corridor. When you," he stopped. He didn't know how to phrase this without making it sound like he was asking for something she hadn't offered. She went very still. "Yes." "What was that?" Why did you, I don't know, she said, quietly, and then immediately corrected herself, that's not true. I know exactly why. I was scared. I watched you on that broomstick and I thought you were going to die and I didn't. She pressed her lips together. I'd been carrying that particular feeling for quite a while and it apparently chose a dramatic exit point. Carrying it since when? She looked at him. In the low light of the hospital wing, with her hair still wild from the wind and her eyes very serious, she looked different from the Hermione who organized his homework and fact-checked his essays and made him feel, sometimes, like the only person in a building full of smarter people. She looked like someone who had decided to stop pretending a particular thing wasn't true. A while, she said. Hermione, you don't have to say anything, she said quickly. I'm not asking you for anything. I shouldn't have done it. It was impulsive and it wasn't fair to put that on you when you just, I'm glad you did, Harry said. She stopped. I'm glad, he repeated. I felt something. When you did that. Not just the emotional thing, I mean something magical. Inside my chest. And then later tonight he stopped himself. He wasn't ready to tell her about Daphne yet, partly because he didn't know what to say and partly because the two heartbeats in his chest were still distinct, still separate, and mentioning one to the other felt like picking up a lit match in a room full of things that could burn. Hermione was watching him with that sharp, careful attention that always meant she was putting things together. Something magical, she said. Yeah. Like a structural shift. In your core? I don't know what my core normally feels like well enough to know if it shifted. Like a door, he said. Like something opening. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and put her hand over his, very carefully. He felt the warmth of her, and underneath it, one of the two heartbeats in his chest gave a faint, unmistakable pulse. Both of them felt it. Hermione pulled her hand back slowly. Her eyes were wide. Harry, she said. Yeah, he said. I think, she started, and then the hospital wing door opened and Madame Pomfrey returned, followed closely by Albus Dumbledore in his dressing gown, looking not so much awakened as interrupted, as though he'd been up already, doing something that now had to wait. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment. His half-moon glasses caught the light. His expression was, as always, that particular blend of warmth and deep calculation that Harry had spent 4 years trying to read correctly. Well, said Dumbledore. This is quite something. You know what it is, Harry said. He didn't make it a question. Dumbledore looked at him, really looked, with the diagnostic weight of someone who had lived a very long time and recognized very old things. I have a theory, he said. But first I'd like to know, have you had any other significant emotional contacts this evening? Beyond the arena? Harry looked at him. Dumbledore looked back, patient and unhurried and one step ahead as always, and Harry had the sudden, vivid, furious sense of how tired he was of Dumbledore being one step ahead. Why? Harry asked. Because the magical signature I'm reading, Dumbledore said, sitting in the chair on the other side of the bed, is not singular. He folded his hands. There are 2 of them. The hospital wing was very quiet. Hermione made a sound that was not quite a word. Harry looked at the ceiling. Right, he said. Harry, Dumbledore said, and his voice was gentler than usual, which was almost worse, I need you to tell me everything that happened tonight. From the arena to now. Harry thought about the corridor. He thought about the lake. He thought about Daphne Greengrass and her deliberate, certain hands and the look in her eyes when she said I want to know you, the real version. He thought about Hermione in the torchlight, saying you were brilliant like it was the thing she'd most needed to say. He thought about 2 heartbeats, not his own, living in his chest. That might take a while, he said. I have all night, said Dumbledore. Outside, the November wind moved through the trees. The lake lay black and still under the stars. And deep in Harry Potter's chest, two distinct magical signatures continued their slow, inevitable, barely begun war. Chapter 2, Two Fires. Dumbledore listened the way he always listened, completely still, hands folded, eyes on Harry's face with that particular quality of attention that made you feel simultaneously important and examined. Harry told him everything. The corridor, the kiss, the pull. The lake, Daphne, the deliberate certainty of it. The two heartbeats he'd been carrying since midnight like passengers who hadn't asked permission. He told it plainly, without decoration, watching Dumbledore's face for the thing the headmaster was always hiding behind the warmth. He found it about halfway through. A flicker of something that wasn't quite surprise, more like confirmation of something already suspected, colliding with something that genuinely alarmed him. Dumbledore was very good at keeping those things apart. But Harry was getting better at watching for the seam. When he finished, the hospital wing was quiet except for the low sound of Hermione's controlled breathing from the chair beside him, which was the sound of someone sitting very still on top of a great deal of feeling. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. A soul bond, he said finally. That's what this is? That is what this is attempting to be, Dumbledore said, and the precision of the word attempting landed in the room with weight. A soul bond is one of the oldest forms of magical connection, older than most spells, older than most of what we teach here. It isn't cast. It forms, under very specific conditions, when a person's magical core is exposed in a state of extreme emotional and physical vulnerability. He paused, such as, for instance, immediately following a life-threatening ordeal. And it latched onto both of them, Madame Pomfrey said from near the window, where she'd been standing with her arms folded and her expression that of someone watching a complicated surgery proceed in ways the textbook hadn't mentioned. It appears so. Dumbledore looked at Harry over his glasses. Which has not, to my knowledge, happened before. A soul bond is designed, if such an organic thing can be said to be designed, for one connection. A singular anchor. Two simultaneous anchors of comparable emotional intensity would create a conflict, Hermione said. Her voice was very precise, very Hermione, but something underneath it was unsteady. The two magical cores would each assert a claim on the bond and on each other through, she stopped. Through Harry. Through Harry, Dumbledore confirmed, looking at her with what seemed like genuine respect. The bond would essentially stage a competition. Each core pulling. The battleground being, as you say, Harry himself. And the fever, Pomfrey said. The fluctuating temperature readings. His core attempting to accommodate two incompatible claims simultaneously. Like a bridge designed for one load bearing two. Dumbledore leaned back slightly. It is not, in the immediate term, dangerous. But if left unresolved, the conflict between the two cores could what? Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him with that expression Harry hated, the one that meant the answer was bad and was being carefully measured for how much of its badness to reveal. Could fragment your core, Dumbledore said. Over time. Not immediately, we have time. But the two fires fighting for the same hearth will eventually do damage to the hearth itself. Harry absorbed this. So what resolves it? In historical cases of soul bonds, singular ones, resolution came through the bond being acknowledged and accepted by both parties. The magic requires reciprocity. Without reciprocity, it either fades or, Dumbledore paused, intensifies. And in this case, with two? Dumbledore was quiet for a moment that was one moment too long. I don't know, he said. Harry looked at him. You have a theory. I have several theories. None with adequate precedent. He stood, smoothing his dressing gown. What I know with certainty is this, both young women need to be told what has happened. The bond will have affected them as well. Smaller effects, but present. They'll be feeling it already. Hermione made a sound. Not a word, a sound, the kind that escapes when you're not watching your own mouth. Dumbledore looked at her gently. Miss Granger. I suspect you already know that something changed this evening. A long pause. Yes, she said quietly. Can you describe it? She looked at her hands in her lap. Like knowing where he is. Even now, in this room, I know exactly where he is without looking. And I can feel something, very faint, like a signal just below the threshold, that isn't my own emotion. She stopped. It's his. And you, Harry? Both of them, Harry said. I can feel both of them. Like two separate frequencies. He pressed his fingers to his sternum. Right now Hermione's, steady. Controlled. Like she's managing something carefully. He looked at Hermione. Which is accurate. Hermione looked back at him with an expression that was raw and careful at once. Yes, she said softly. That's accurate. And the other signature? Harry thought about it. Found the second heartbeat, the cooler one, the one with that particular quality of intention to it. Asleep, he said, surprised. She's asleep. A pause. She feels quiet. Like deep water. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment. You'll need to tell her tomorrow. Both of you together, I think, would be, no, Harry said. Everyone looked at him. I'll tell her myself, Harry said. One conversation at a time. This isn't a committee meeting. Dumbledore studied him for a beat. Something shifted in the headmaster's expression, not quite approval, but something adjacent to it, like a man revising an assessment upward. Very well, he said. Tomorrow, then. In the meantime, he turned to Pomfrey. Poppy, I suspect a stasis draft might ease the fever. Not suppress the bond, we don't want to interfere with it, but settle the noise long enough for him to sleep. Already mixed, Pomfrey said, producing a small blue vial with the competence of someone who had anticipated this before Dumbledore had finished the sentence. Dumbledore paused at the door. Harry. Yeah. The bond didn't choose randomly. It found what it found because of what was already there. He looked at Harry steadily. I want you to remember that. Whatever else happens, the magic didn't create something that didn't exist. It only recognized what did. He left. His robes made no sound in the corridor. Harry stared at the ceiling. The stasis draft tasted like chalk and cold metal, and within 3 minutes the 2 heartbeats in his chest quieted to a murmur, and he slept. He dreamed about a door in a room full of light, and 2 keys that fit the same lock. Morning arrived with the particular aggression of Scottish November, grey and cold and entirely without sympathy for people who'd spent the night in the hospital wing processing life-altering magical developments. Hermione had gone back to Gryffindor Tower at 3, under protest. Harry knew because he'd felt her leave, a slight diminishing of one of the 2 signals, still present but muted by distance. He was getting used to it the way you got used to background noise, which was to say that it wasn't bothering him so much as it was simply there, constant and informative and strange. Pomfrey released him at 7:30 with a new vial of the stasis draft, instructions to take it if the fever spiked again, and a look that communicated without words that she expected him to cause her a great deal of professional trouble over the coming weeks. I'll try to be straightforward about it, Harry told her. In my experience, she said, that's not a Potter family trait. He found Hermione waiting in the corridor outside, leaning against the wall with her bag over her shoulder and dark circles under her eyes that matched his own, a cup of tea from the kitchens in each hand. She held one out. He took it. They walked toward the great hall in comfortable silence for a moment, which was one of the things about Hermione that Harry valued most. She could do silence without filling it. Unlike Ron, who treated silence as a structural problem requiring immediate repair. How do you feel? She asked. Clearer, he said, which was true. The stasis draft had damped the noise, but the 2 signals were still there, still distinct. Now that he'd slept, he could feel the difference between them more precisely. Hermione's was brighter, more active even this early, like a fire that had been going for years and knew its own rhythms. Daphne's was cooler, more contained, but with more depth to it, like, he stopped himself. This was not the kind of comparison that led anywhere productive before breakfast. "I want to ask you something," Hermione said, as they turned toward the staircase. "And I want you to be honest. Always. Are you angry? About any of this? About what I did?" He thought about it for a real moment rather than an automatic one. "No," he said. "I'm not angry. I don't have a word for what I am. But it's not angry." He glanced at her. "Are you? About any of it?" She was quiet. "I'm frightened," she said. "And I hate being frightened. It makes me behave badly." "You've been behaving fine. So far." A pause. "When you tell her, Daphne, I want you to know that however I react when I find out whatever she says, I'm not going to make this harder for you. I promise." She looked at him sideways. "I might make it harder for her, briefly, if she's awful about it." "She won't be awful," Harry said. Hermione's stride hitched, almost imperceptibly. "You sound certain." "I felt her last night," he said simply. "There's nothing awful about what's in there." They reached the great hall entrance. The smell of breakfast drifted out, warm and ordinary, and the noise of 700 students eating eggs and arguing about the first task scores drifted with it. Through the windows, Harry could see the Slytherin table, and without meaning to, he found his gaze moving along it. Daphne Greengrass was sitting with Tracy Davis and Pansy Parkinson, in her usual seat, in her usual posture, perfectly composed, perfectly contained. She was looking at her plate. Then, as though she felt him looking, she raised her head. Across the entire length of the great hall, their eyes met. The second signal in his chest gave a clear, specific pulse. Daphne's composure held. But something moved behind her eyes, quick and unguarded, before she looked back at her plate. Hermione, who missed nothing, was looking resolutely at the Gryffindor table. Her jaw was very slightly tense. "Breakfast," Harry said. "Yes," Hermione said. They went in. He found Daphne at 9, in the library. He'd known she'd be there without knowing how he knew. The second signal had a directional quality to it now, like a compass needle, pointing with quiet certainty through the castle's walls and corridors. He followed it through 2 staircases and the east corridor, and pushed open the library door, and there she was at a table near the window with 3 books open and a 4th in her hand, her robes neat, her hair up, looking for all the world like someone spending a productive Saturday morning in research. She looked up when he came in. Her face didn't change. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said. "You knew I would?" "I knew where you were all morning," she said. "Woke up knowing it. Went to sleep knowing it." She set the book down carefully. "I've been reading." Harry sat down across from her. "About soul bonds?" A flicker of something crossed her face. "Not surprise, recognition. You know what it is. Dumbledore told me last night." "It's in Linwood's Compendium of Ancient Magical Phenomena," she said, tapping the open book to her left. Chapter 12. Soul bonds. Historically rare. Formed under conditions of extreme vulnerability and emotional intensity. She looked at him. Untriggered in recorded magical history by more than one simultaneous anchoring event. A pause. Until, apparently, now. "Daphne, who is the other person?" Harry met her eyes. "Hermione Granger." Not a flicker. Not a flinch. Daphne absorbed this with the stillness of someone who had learned to take hits without moving and had practiced it until it looked like nothing at all. Only her hands, flat on the table, gave anything away, the slight increase of pressure, fingertips pressing into wood. "When?" she asked. "The corridor under the stands. After the task." He watched her face. She didn't know about you. She still doesn't know the details. I told her I'd tell you myself. That was considerate. Daphne's voice was even. She looked out the window at the grounds below. The lake was visible, a grey mirror under the November sky, and Harry watched her look at the place they'd stood last night. She kissed you first. Yes. And you felt the same thing. Both times. The same mechanism. Different quality. He said it plainly because she deserved plain. You feel different from her. Cooler. Deeper. Not less, different. She looked back at him. You can feel the difference. I can feel both of you right now. All the time. Something moved across her face that she didn't fully manage to contain, not anger, not hurt, something more complicated. The expression of someone who had taken a calculated risk with full knowledge of the odds and discovered the odds were stranger than anticipated. I don't share well, she said. I want to be honest about that. I know, Harry said. I'm not asking you to decide anything right now. I'm not asking either of you to decide anything. I'm just telling you what's happening. What is happening, exactly? Beyond the mechanics of it? Harry thought about how Dumbledore had said it. The bond is fighting itself. Two competing claims on the same anchor. If it doesn't resolve, it starts doing damage. To you. Yes. Daphne was quiet for a moment. Then, with a precision that he was starting to understand was characteristic of her, she said, "What does Dumbledore suggest?" He doesn't know. He said he has theories but no precedent. Linwood doesn't have precedent either. She touched the book. Chapter 12 ends with a paragraph noting that dual anchor bonds are theoretically possible but have never been observed and are probably incompatible with a stable magical existence. She looked at him. Probably. Comforting. I thought so. A pause. I want to see Dumbledore's theories. So do I, Harry said. He was holding something back last night. He does that. All old men with power do that. She said it without particular venom, just a certainty born of a Slytherin upbringing. It's how they keep it. She closed the Linwood and looked at him squarely. I want to be clear about something. Okay. I kissed you with intention and I don't regret it, she said. What I didn't intend was this. The bond. I didn't know that was possible. A pause. But I'm not going to pretend I wish it hadn't happened. I felt you. Last night, after I went to sleep, I felt you in the hospital wing, the fever, Pomfrey fussing, Dumbledore talking. I felt you worried and tired and underneath all of it, she stopped. Underneath all of it what? She held his gaze. Underneath all of it, you felt relieved. Like something that had been held under pressure for a very long time had been allowed to move. Harry didn't say anything. Because she was right, and they both knew she was right, and saying so seemed redundant. I'm not going away, Daphne said. Whatever this becomes. I'm not going away. Good, Harry said. Neither am I. She almost smiled. It was quick and real and entirely different from the composed face she wore in public. He filed it away carefully. Go have your conversation with Granger, she said, pulling the Linwood back toward her. She needs the details. She'll be useless until she has them. A pause. And Potter, Harry, he said. She looked at him. A beat. Harry. Something in her voice shifted when she said his name, just slightly, like a key finding a lock. Don't let Dumbledore manage this. He'll try to. He always does, Harry said. Yes, she agreed. Don't let him. He left her in the library, reading Linwood's chapter 12 with the focused attention of someone who intended to know more than everyone else in the room by nightfall. He followed the corridor back toward Gryffindor Tower, where Hermione was almost certainly doing exactly the same thing with a different book. He thought about two fires in the same hearth. He thought that both of them burned very well, actually, and that maybe the problem wasn't the fire but the architect who'd built a hearth too small. He went to find Hermione. He found her in the Gryffindor common room with 4 books, her notes, and an expression on her face that he recognized as "I have been doing research for 3 hours and have arrived at conclusions that terrify me." "Sit down," she said, the moment he came through the portrait hole. He sat. She pushed her notes toward him, neat, ordered, color-coded by source in a way that would have made anyone else feel illiterate. He looked at them without picking them up. "Soul bonds," she said. "I've been through every relevant source I could access before the library opened and then 3 more when it did." She paused. Daphne Greengrass had Linwood's compendium checked out this morning. "I had to use the reference copy." Harry looked at her. "She's thorough," Hermione said, in the tone of someone who respects something they'd strongly prefer not to respect. "I'll give her that." "She was there when I talked to her," Harry said. "She took it well. I'm sure she was perfectly composed." Hermione. Hermione pressed her lips together. Looked at her notes. Looked back at him. "I'm sorry. I'm working on it." She pushed a breath out through her nose. "What did she say?" "That she's not going away." He watched Hermione's face. "And I told her I was glad." Hermione absorbed this. Her hand moved to the edge of her parchment and straightened it, though it was already perfectly straight. "Right," she said. "Are you actually all right?" "I'm not all right," she said, which was Hermione forgive me a moment. She gathered herself visibly, the way she gathered herself for exams, shoulders back, chin up, mind forward. "What I am is informed, which is better. So let me tell you what I've found." She pulled her notes back toward her and he let her, because this was how Hermione processed the things that scared her. She turned them into problems with solutions, she mapped the territory, she did not let the unknown stay unknown. It was one of the best things about her and occasionally one of the most exhausting. "Soul bonds are triggered by proximity to death combined with a significant emotional catalyst," she said. "The magic essentially reaches for the nearest emotionally resonant anchor point. In your case, there were 2 simultaneous anchors of comparable significance." She said it carefully, like she was stepping on ice of uncertain thickness. "Which shouldn't have been possible, but your magic has never paid much attention to what's possible. It takes after me that way. Harry." She gave him a look. "This is serious." "I know it's serious. Keep going. The bond affects both parties. Not just the anchor, the bond creates reciprocal connections. That's why I can feel you, and you can feel me. What I haven't been able to determine is, what happens with 2 bonds in conflict." She tapped her notes. "Every source I've found describes singular bonds. The closest I've found to a dual scenario is a footnote in Arcturus Blackwood's treatise on sympathetic magic." She pulled a separate page forward, written in 1743, referencing an incident where a bonding event was disrupted mid-formation by a second emotional catalyst. Blackwood describes it as, she found the line, a catastrophic division of the core's integrity, resolved only by the termination of one connection by force. Silence. "By force," Harry said. "That was 1743, Hermione said quickly. Magical medicine was barbaric. The idea that it requires that outcome isn't necessarily, Hermione." He looked at her steadily. "I'm not terminating anything. Either connection." She met his eyes. Hers were bright, too bright, the way they went when she was fighting something that wasn't an argument. "I know," she said quietly. "I wasn't suggesting, I know you weren't." He reached across and put his hand over hers on the notes. She went still. The first signal in his chest, Hermione's signal, flared warm and immediate, and he felt her sharp intake of breath as she felt it too. We're going to find another way. She looked at his hand on hers. There might not be precedent for another way. There's no precedent for most of what happens to me, he said. I've stopped using precedent as a benchmark. She laughed, which was unexpected and broke something in the air between them, the tension releasing into something warmer, more like themselves. She turned her hand under his so their fingers interlaced, which felt both natural and enormous, and they sat like that for a moment in the morning light of the Gryffindor common room with the fire going and the sound of the castle's ordinary Saturday life moving around them. She's going to want to compare research, Hermione said. Daphne. Probably already ahead of you. She is not. Hermione stopped. Looked at him. Saw his face. You're enjoying this. A little. You're a terrible person. I'm really not, he said, but I appreciate the commitment. She pulled her hand back with the expression of someone resisting a smile, and pulled her notes toward her, and said, there's something else. Something I found that I think is more important than the danger aspect. He sobered. Tell me. The bond doesn't just create a connection, it amplifies the anchor. The person at the center of the bond. She looked at him carefully. The historical cases where soul bonds formed and stabilized, the people at the anchor point showed significant increases in magical capacity. Accessed parts of their core that were previously dormant. Not because the bond gave them power, because the bond forced their core to fully open to accommodate the connection. She paused. Harry, your core was already unusual. What happens when a core like yours fully opens? We don't know, Harry said. No, she agreed. We don't know. He sat with that for a moment. Felt the two signals in his chest, Hermione's warm and present, Daphne's cooler and distant but completely distinct. Both of them real. Both of them doing something to his magic that he hadn't had a word for until now, opening it. There's something I need to do, he said. What? I need to go see Dumbledore. He stood. And this time I'm not letting him manage the conversation. Hermione looked up at him. Do you want me to come? He thought about it. Not yet. I want to hear what he's holding back first. He picked up his bag. But Hermione, yes? When I come back, you and Daphne should meet. Properly. Not an ambush, not a corridor, actually meet and talk. He held up a hand before she could object. The bond is going to keep pulling you toward each other through me. It's going to be easier if you're not pretending the other person doesn't exist. Hermione was quiet for a long moment. That's very rational, she said. I have my moments. She'll be composed and infuriating and she'll probably have read more of Linwood than I have. Probably. Fine, Hermione said. She picked up her quill. Fine. Go see Dumbledore. A pause. And Harry, ask him about the Potter grimoires. He stopped. What? She looked at him steadily. Your family had one of the largest private magical libraries in Britain before Godric's Hollow. Most of it was catalogued by the Ministry after your parents died. Dumbledore would know where it is. Her eyes were very direct. It's yours. You should have access to it. He looked at her for a moment. How long have you known about that? Since second year, she said, without apology. He held her gaze for one more second, then turned and walked out of the common room. He didn't knock. He'd made a decision about that in the corridor. The stone gargoyle stepped aside before he said the password, which meant Dumbledore had either told it to expect him or was doing the thing where he anticipated so thoroughly it became indistinguishable from manipulation. Harry was tired of being unable to tell the difference. He came up the spiral stairs and into the circular office and didn't sit down. Dumbledore was at his desk. He looked up without apparent surprise. Harry. The Potter Library, Harry said. A pause. Fawkes made a sound on his perch, low and musical. Sit down, Dumbledore said. I'm fine standing. Where is it? Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, that look, the one that measured and weighed and calculated, and Harry stood in it without shifting and looked back with a steadiness he hadn't known he had until recently. He could feel the two signals in his chest, warm and grounding, and understood suddenly what Dumbledore had meant. The bond recognized what was already there. He wasn't standing here because of the bond. He'd always been capable of standing here. He just never had reason to know it. Most of it, Dumbledore said, is in storage at Gringotts. Your family vault. A pause. Some of it I took for safekeeping after Godric's Hollow. Safekeeping, Harry said. Yes. Meaning I don't have access to it. Meaning I thought it wiser. Where is it? Harry said. The office was quiet. The portraits on the walls had stilled. Phineas Nigellus, in his frame near the window, had the expression of someone watching something rare. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he rose from his chair and crossed to the cabinet beside the window, the one Harry had always assumed held instrument components or spare magical apparatus, and opened it. Inside, on 3 shelves, were 7 books. Old ones, the kind of old where the leather had gone dark and the gold lettering had faded to a glint. They looked nothing like the Hogwarts library's ancient texts. They looked used. Worked with. Studied and annotated and loved. Your grandfather's, Dumbledore said. Fleamont Potter's annotations. And your grandmother's before him. Euphemia's notes are in the margins of the 3rd volume. He paused. I kept them here because I intended to give them to you when I believed you were ready. I'm ready now, Harry said. Harry, I'm not asking, Professor. He said it without heat, just plain, just fact. They're my family's. I'll take them now. Another long pause. Something moved in Dumbledore's expression that Harry recognized with a jolt. It was the look of a man revising a plan. Not unhappily. Almost, if Harry was reading it right, with something like relief. Yes, Dumbledore said. I suppose you should. Harry crossed the room and picked up the 7 books. They were heavier than they looked. One of them, when he touched it, gave off a faint warmth that had nothing to do with the room's temperature, the kind of warmth that was recognition, old magic acknowledging something it had been waiting for. The bond, Dumbledore said, behind him. I was less than fully forthcoming last night. Harry turned. The reason dual anchor bonds have no historical resolution precedent, Dumbledore said, is not because they've never occurred. It's because in every case on record, 3 cases, across 5 centuries, they were forcibly terminated by outside parties who considered them too dangerous to allow to stabilize. He looked at Harry steadily. I want you to know that I have no intention of doing that. Good, Harry said. Because you'd find it considerably harder than you're imagining. Dumbledore's beard shifted. It was not quite a smile. Yes, he said. I believe I would. Harry looked at the old man, at the long white beard and the half-moon glasses and the eyes that had been carrying the weight of a war for 60 years, and felt something complex that wasn't quite forgiveness and wasn't quite anger. It was clearer than both of those things. It was just seeing. I'll want to discuss the theories you didn't share last night, Harry said. When I've had time to read these. Of course, Dumbledore said. Harry left with 7 books under his arm and 2 fires in his chest and the sense, for the first time in a long time, that the shape of his own life was beginning to belong to him. He found them in the library. He hadn't planned it, he'd been heading there himself, books under his arm, intending to start on the first grimoire before lunch. He came through the door and stopped. Hermione and Daphne were sitting at the same table. Not comfortably. There was approximately 18 inches between them and the specific quality of careful distance between 2 people who are very much aware of each other. Hermione had her notes. Daphne had Linwood's compendium plus 2 other books Harry didn't recognize. Both of them looked up when he came in. Neither of them said anything. "You're both here," Harry observed. "I arrived first," Hermione said. "I was here before breakfast," Daphne said, which was factually true and both of them knew it and neither of them was going to say anything else about it. Harry pulled out a chair and sat between them and put the 7 books on the table. Both women looked at them immediately, with the specific attention of people who recognized old magic when it was in the room. "Potter grimoires," Daphne said. "Dumbledore had them." Harry opened the first one. "Starting now." A brief silence. Then Hermione leaned slightly in from his left to see the cover, and Daphne leaned slightly in from his right, and both of them pulled back at exactly the same moment when they realized they were mirroring each other. The corner of Harry's mouth moved. "Something funny?" Hermione asked. "No," Harry said. "You were smiling." "Reading," he said, turning a page. Daphne made a sound that was not quite a laugh and began reading Linwood. Hermione pushed her notes aside and leaned over to see the grimoire more clearly, and after a moment's considered pause, Daphne shifted Linwood so that the spine was angled where both she and Harry could see the relevant pages. It was not comfortable. It was not warm. But it was something. 2 extraordinarily capable witches in a library with a stack of books that might contain the answers they all needed, and the understanding, unspoken but present, that whatever they thought of each other, this particular problem required all 3 of them working in the same direction. The 2 signals in Harry's chest sat side by side, distinct and warm, and didn't fight. Not yet. Harry thought, yet. Outside, the November sky broke briefly and pale light fell through the library's high windows and moved across the table like something making an announcement, catching the gold lettering on the old grimoire covers, illuminating the notes in the margins written in a hand Harry didn't know but recognized, the way you recognize your own face in a stranger's photograph. His grandmother's handwriting. His grandfather's annotations. His family's magic, sitting under his hands, waiting. He turned the page. Chapter 3, The Battleground. The first grimoire was called Potestas Viva, Living Power, and it was not organized like any book Harry had ever read. There was no index. No table of contents. The chapters didn't announce themselves with headings. It moved the way a conversation moved, one idea pulling the next behind it, annotations in 3 different hands layered over the original text like a palimpsest of everyone who'd ever wrestled with it. His grandfather's notes were in dark brown ink, dense and practical. His grandmother Euphemia's were in green, written smaller, often in the margins of the margins, and frequently more interesting than the main text. The third set of annotations, older, in faded black, Harry couldn't identify, but they had the quality of someone who had understood the book so completely they were arguing with it. He read for 3 hours on Saturday and 2 more on Sunday morning, and by Sunday afternoon he understood enough to know why Dumbledore had kept it. The book was about inheritance. Not property, magical inheritance. The Potter line's specific relationship with what the grimoire called core sovereignty, the idea that Potter magic, through some accident or intention of ancestry, ran deeper and more autonomously than most. That it made its own decisions. That it had always, in moments of extremity, reached beyond what its wielder consciously intended and done what it determined was necessary. The soul bond wasn't an accident. Or rather, it was exactly as accidental as a Potter reaching for a wand they hadn't consciously summoned. The magic had done what Potter magic did, it had acted. Harry was sitting with this on Sunday afternoon in the corner of the library when the first real flare happened. It started small, a warmth in the center of his chest, familiar enough by now that he almost didn't register it. Then it sharpened. Then it became something else entirely. He was in the middle of a sentence about core resonance when Daphne's signal went from its usual cool steady depth to something electric and sharp, and simultaneously Hermione's signal surged from warm to blazing, and between the 2 of them it felt like standing between 2 open furnaces, heat from opposite directions, and the point where the 2 waves of heat met was directly in the center of Harry's sternum. He closed the grimoire. He pressed both palms flat on the table. "Harry." He looked up. Hermione was 3 shelves away with an armful of books, and she was looking at him with an expression that told him she was feeling it too, her own signal amplified by the conflict with Daphne's, feeding back through the bond like sound through a too narrow pipe. "Where is she?" Harry said. "Somewhere closer than she was," Hermione said, setting the books down with careful precision. "She just shifted. Her signal just." The library door opened. Daphne walked in looking like someone who had been doing something calm and had then encountered something that was not calm, and her eyes found Harry immediately. She crossed to the table without speaking and sat down, and for a moment all 3 of them were present in the same space, and the pressure in Harry's chest went from 2 furnaces to something that had no comfortable metaphor, just enormous, and building. "It's getting stronger," Daphne said. "Yes," Hermione said. They looked at each other. Harry watched both of their faces, Hermione tight with the effort of managing something she couldn't think her way out of, Daphne composed on the surface with that particular quality of stillness that he was learning meant she was working very hard underneath. "The grimoire," Harry said, because talking about it was better than sitting in it, "has something relevant." He opened Potesta's Viva to the page he'd been on and turned it so they could both see. "My grandmother's note here," he pointed. "She's describing what she calls core resonance events. When Potter magic opens fully, it doesn't just amplify the person at the center. It actively reaches toward," he stopped. "Toward connected cores," Daphne said, reading. Her voice was very even. "It pulls them into conflict," Hermione said, reading the same line from the other side. "If the connected cores are, if they're incompatible in," she stopped too. "In temperament and magical signature," Daphne finished. Silence. "We're incompatible," Hermione said. She said it like a fact, not an accusation, but there was something in her voice that made it feel like both. "In this specific sense," Daphne said. "Our cores are opposite in structure. Yours is expansive, high heat, constantly moving. Mine is deep and contained and pressurized." She looked at Hermione directly. "When Harry's core pulls both of ours through the bond simultaneously, they don't blend. They collide. And the collision site is Harry," Hermione said. "Yes." Harry looked between them. "So what does that mean practically? What happens if it keeps escalating?" Hermione pulled her notes forward. "I found a passage in Blackwood's treatise that describes a similar dynamic, not a dual bond, but a case where a bonded pair had incompatible cores and the conflict manifested externally. The anchor began," she found the line, "releasing spontaneous magical discharge with increasing frequency and violence, the cores attempt to equalize the competing pressures through expulsion." "Spontaneous magical discharge," Harry repeated. "You'll start throwing magic involuntarily," Daphne said plainly. "When the pressure gets high enough." "In the middle of classes," Hermione added, with the expression of someone who finds this horrifying on multiple levels. "It's already started," Harry said. Both women looked at him. "Last night," he said. "I was reading in the dormitory and my wand rolled off the nightstand and every candle in the room lit simultaneously." He looked at his hands. "I hadn't said anything. Hadn't pointed at anything. They just lit." Hermione's expression shifted from alarm to something more complicated. "How much power are we talking?" "It was just candles." This time, Daphne said quietly. The pressure in his chest had eased slightly since they were all in the same room. Something about proximity to both signals simultaneously seemed to balance the collision rather than worsen it, which was interesting and worth remembering. He filed it. "There's something else in the grimoire," he said, turning pages. "My grandfather's notes, here." He found the passage. He's describing the theoretical case of a core sovereignty event in which the subject becomes a nexus point for external magical conflict. His note says, Harry read it aloud, "The danger in such events is never the power itself. Power finds its level. The danger is the wielder refusing to let it. A Potter who fights his own magic loses." A Potter who moves with it wins. The only question worth asking, what direction is it actually pulling? Silence. Daphne picked up the grimoire and read the note again herself. Her expression did something subtle and interesting. Your grandfather was pragmatic, she said. He was a healer, Harry said. Apparently. I didn't know that. Fleamont Potter was the best potions developer of his generation, Daphne said, with the easy certainty of someone whose family's dinner table conversation had included such things. He created Sleekeazy's hair potion. Among other things. She glanced up. Your family has a significant legacy, Harry. Most of which you've apparently never been told. Shocking development, Harry said dryly. Yes, Dumbledore's been very thorough in his. Hermione stopped herself. Pressed her lips together. That's a conversation for another time. What does moving with it mean, practically? What direction is your core pulling? Harry thought about it. Put his hand over his sternum, found both signals, let himself actually feel them instead of managing them. Hermione's, expansive, reaching, warm and bright and constantly in motion. Daphne's, deep, pressurized, contained but with an enormous amount of force held very deliberately still. What was his own magic doing between them? Pulling toward both. Not choosing. Expanding toward both simultaneously, like it wanted more room. Out, he said. Out where? Hermione asked. Just, out. Like it wants more space than it currently has. He looked at the grimoire. Like the hearth is too small. Daphne set the book down. Then we stop trying to fit it into the existing hearth, she said. Hermione looked at her. That's not a solution, that's a metaphor. It's a direction, Daphne said. Which is more than we had. We need to stop treating this like a problem to be solved from the outside, Daphne said, and her voice was still even but had gained a quality of intensity that Harry recognized as her equivalent of Hermione's raised voice. Every source we've read approaches the bond as something to be managed or contained or resolved. Your notes, she glanced at Hermione's parchment, are full of strategies for limiting damage. Blackwood's solution was termination. Dumbledore's solution is probably something careful and controlled and long-term. She looked at Harry. What does your grandfather's note say? A Potter who moves with it wins. You're suggesting he deliberately developed the power, Hermione said flatly. Rather than manage it. I'm suggesting that managing it is how you get spontaneous combustion of every candle in the dormitory, yes. And if he develops it incorrectly and we end up with, are you actually afraid of his power? Daphne asked. Or are you afraid of not being able to anticipate what he does with it? The temperature in the air between them dropped about 6 degrees. Harry said, both of you. Quietly, but with something in it that made both of them look at him. This is exactly the collision the grimoire is describing. You're not actually arguing about strategy. You're arguing because the bond is pulling your cores toward each other and neither of you knows what to do with that and it's coming out sideways. Silence. Hermione's jaw was tight. Daphne's hands were flat on the table. I'm not wrong, Harry said. No, Hermione said, after a moment. You're not wrong. Daphne said nothing, which was its own form of agreement. Here's what I want to do, Harry said. I want to try something in an empty classroom. Something from the grimoire. And I want both of you there. He looked at each of them. Not because I need witnesses. Because Euphemia's notes suggest that deliberately opening toward both connections simultaneously, rather than trying to balance them, might do the opposite of what we're afraid of. He found the passage. Here, he pointed. His grandmother's green ink. The error in dual resonance suppression is the assumption that more power means more danger. In my observation, the danger comes from the gap between the power available and the power permitted. Close the gap. The magic calms when it's allowed to be what it is. Hermione read it twice. Her expression moved from defensive to thoughtful to cautious interest. That's, she started. Sensible, Daphne said. I was going to say unorthodox, Hermione said. You were going to say sensible, Harry said. Hermione gave him a look and picked up her quill. They found an empty classroom on the 4th floor, the kind that hadn't been used for anything but storage since before any of them were born, desks pushed to the walls, a layer of dust on the floor, afternoon light coming through windows that hadn't been cleaned in decades. It was perfect, as empty classrooms went, because it was far enough from any active classroom or corridor that what happened inside it wouldn't immediately become the subject of Hogwarts gossip. Harry stood in the center. Hermione was to his left, Daphne to his right, both of them far enough back that they were outside the radius of whatever he was about to do. What exactly are you going to attempt? Hermione asked. Stop trying to hold it down, Harry said. See what happens. That's your plan? My grandfather's plan. He looked at Hermione. Your signal, Hermione. Don't pull it back. Don't manage it. Hermione looked at him for a moment. She had the expression of someone being asked to do something that ran counter to every instinct she developed over 14 years. Then she pushed a slow breath out and said, All right. Daphne. He looked at her. Same. Daphne nodded once. Her eyes were very steady. Harry closed his eyes. He found the two signals, Hermione's to his left, warm and active and trying very hard not to manage itself. Daphne's to his right, deep and contained and deliberately releasing some of its own pressure. He found his own core between them, the thing that Potter magic actually was when it wasn't being pressed into wand-shaped channels and school-approved spells. He stopped pressing. The first thing that happened was the dust on the floor moved. Not a wind, there was no wind. The dust simply relocated, spreading outward from where Harry stood in a perfect circle, as though the air around him had quietly expanded by several inches in every direction. The second thing was the light. The afternoon light through the dirty windows intensified without the clouds outside moving, as though the glass had simply decided to let more of it through. The third thing was the warmth. It started in his chest, at the exact point where the two signals met, and moved outward through his arms and into his hands, and his hands began to glow. Not dramatically, not the blinding light of a spell. A low, deep gold, the color of firelight seen through old glass. Harry, Hermione said, quietly. He opened his eyes. His hands were gold. The circle of cleared floor around him had extended. One of the dusty old desks at the edge of the room had floated 6 inches off the ground without him looking at it. He could feel both of them clearly, Hermione, whose signal had stopped managing itself and was now moving freely, warm and reaching, and he felt the intelligence in it, the vast curious energy of her mind expressed in magic, reaching toward him and finding him and doing something to his own core that felt like adding oxygen to a fire. And Daphne, whose signal was doing what pressurized things do when they're released, flowing outward with extraordinary calm force, not the leaping heat of Hermione's but something deeper and more directional, like a river that had found its channel. Between the two of them, his magic did something it had never done in 14 years of wand work and school spells. It opened. Not completely. Not dangerously. Just, a door further ajar than it had ever been. The gold in his hands deepened. The floating desk was joined by 2 others. And the pressure in his chest, the competing collision, the 2 furnaces pushing against each other, equalized. Not because the fires had dampened. Because there was suddenly enough room for both of them. He let it run for 30 seconds, maybe 40. Then he closed the door. Not all the way, he understood now, from the grimoire and from the specific sensation of it, that closing it all the way was what caused the buildup. He left it open a crack, like a window in winter, letting just enough out that the room stayed breathable. The desks descended. The gold faded from his hands. The light returned to ordinary. The silence was absolute. Well, Daphne said, after a moment. Her voice was very composed and very slightly not composed. That was, Hermione started, and stopped, and started again. That was a controlled expression of an unquantified magical event, and I have absolutely no framework for how to document it, and I need to sit down. She sat on a dusty desk. Daphne looked at her, and then looked at Harry, and then looked at the place on the floor where the dust had cleared in a perfect circle. "How do you feel?" Daphne asked. "Good," Harry said. And then, because it was true and they both deserved the truth, better than I have in years, actually. Hermione looked up at him from the desk. Her eyes were bright and slightly wet, which she was clearly refusing to acknowledge. "Your grandfather was right," she said. "He usually was," Daphne said, which surprised both Harry and Hermione slightly, and then she clarified, "Old magical families keep very thorough records. The Greengrasses have several cross-references to Fleamont Potter's research on core sovereignty." A pause. "I should have made the connection sooner. I apologize." It was a very Daphne apology, precise and without excess sentiment, and Hermione looked at her for a moment with an expression that was recalibrating something. "You've read Fleamont Potter's research," Hermione said. "We have copies of the published portions. And you didn't mention this when we first started looking at the grimoire because I didn't want to give you the impression I was showing off," Daphne said simply. Hermione stared at her. Actually I understand that completely." She pulled out her notes. "What else do you have that I should know about?" "Quite a lot," Daphne said. "Shall I start with the relevant portions?" "Please." Harry sat against the wall and let them talk. It was remarkable, watching the two of them engage directly, without him as the sole point of mediation, for the first time. They were wary still, circling each other with the care of two people aware that they were in contested territory. But underneath the wariness was something that he recognized, because he'd seen it happen in classrooms and libraries before, two genuinely exceptional minds discovering the specific pleasure of meeting something at their own level. The signals in his chest were still distinct, still different. But they'd stopped colliding. He opened the grimoire to his grandmother's notes and read until the light through the dirty windows turned orange. Potter. He was coming down the defense corridor on Monday morning, early, before most of the castle was awake, when the voice came from a doorway to his left. Moody. Or the thing wearing Moody's face, though Harry didn't know that yet. He knew Mad-Eye Moody as the slightly unnerving, occasionally brilliant defense teacher who drank from a flask and whose magical eye swiveled through the back of his head with the specific quality of someone who had survived by seeing everything. Moody's real eye fixed on Harry. The magical eye was doing its usual independent rotation, currently aimed somewhere over Harry's left shoulder. Harry had never been entirely comfortable with it. "Morning, Professor. You did well in the first task," Moody said. He said it the way he said most things, bluntly, without warmth, as a statement of tactical assessment rather than praise. Summoning charm was smart. Broomstick was smart. The way you read the dragon's movement patterns in real time, the magical eye ticked toward Harry's face, that wasn't taught. That was instinct. Or desperation, Harry said. Same thing, at your age. Moody leaned against the doorframe. His prosthetic leg made its distinctive sound against the stone. "I wanted to ask you something. The other night, Sunday, in the fourth-floor classroom. The magical eye stopped rotating entirely, which was somehow more unsettling than when it moved. The light under the door." Harry went still. He kept his face easy. "I was practicing some spell work. Getting used to the extra wand time." "That wasn't a spell," Moody said. "I know what spell work looks like from outside a room. That was something else." The real I was watching Harry with the specific attention of someone who had spent 40 years identifying things that were not what they claimed to be. "I've seen maybe 3 things in my career that left a residue like what I felt in that corridor." "What things?" Harry asked, because he was curious and because refusing to engage would be more suspicious than asking. Things that shouldn't exist, by most accounts. Moody was quiet for a moment. "Are you well, Potter? Physically?" "Fine," Harry said. "The fever last week. Madame Pomfrey sorted it." "Did she?" "The magical eye moved to a slow revolution. You should come to me if something is happening that you don't understand. That's what I'm here for." Harry looked at him. At the scarred face and the prosthetic leg and the flask that he drank from reflexively even now, at 7 in the morning. He thought about what Daphne had said, old men with power, it's how they keep it. He thought about what his grandfather's notes had said about moving with his magic rather than against it. He thought about the specific quality of Moody's attention, not concerned, exactly. More like interested. The way a collector looks at something rare. "Thanks, Professor," Harry said. "I'll keep that in mind." He walked on. He felt the magical eye on his back all the way to the staircase. Defense Against the Dark Arts, Tuesday afternoon, was a class that went wrong in a very specific way. They were working on counter curses. Standard fourth-year material, Moody had them paired up, working through a sequence of deflection exercises, the kind of practical work that Harry was genuinely good at because it required no theory, just response. He was paired with Neville, who was improving steadily since third year and who, to his own evident surprise, was managing the deflections cleanly. Harry was half his attention on the practical work and half on the grimoire content he'd been reading that morning, specifically Euphemia's notes on what she called passive resonance. The idea that once a core was partially open, it didn't switch off between deliberate uses, it maintained a low-level awareness of its environment, reaching outward slightly, reading the magical signatures around it. He was thinking about this when Malfoy, from across the room, said something to Pansy Parkinson that made her laugh, and Harry caught the words Potter and Dead and Tournament and the specific satisfied tone that Malfoy used when he believed he was being clever. Under ordinary circumstances Harry would have ignored it. He'd had 4 years of practice ignoring Malfoy. But his core was open. Just a crack, just the window in winter amount he'd been maintaining since Sunday. And Malfoy's satisfaction was a specific kind of magical signature, the sharp-edged petty malice that Harry's newly sensitive awareness picked up like a bad smell. He turned toward Malfoy across the room. He didn't say anything. He just looked at him. Malfoy looked back, smirking, starting to say something else. And Harry's magic, the open crack of it, the piece that was running on its own judgment, decided to make a point. Every deflection shield in the room failed simultaneously. Not explosively, they just dropped, all 12 pairs of them, the magical constructs dissolving in a clean wave outward from where Harry was standing. The room went suddenly silent in the way rooms go silent when something unexpected has happened and no one has processed it yet. Neville was looking at his wand with the expression of a man who expects to be blamed. Moody, from the front of the room, was absolutely still. Malfoy had gone pale. "Potter," Moody said. Very carefully. "Sorry," Harry said. He closed the crack. Completely, just for a moment, then opened it to its usual winter window fraction again. The classroom felt stuffy and dim when it was closed, which was interesting and unfortunate. "Sorry, I lost focus." "Neville, do you want to try again?" Neville said, with remarkable equanimity for a boy who had just had his shield dissolved by ambient magic, "Sure." "Sure, yeah." The room restarted, slowly, pairs picking up their practice again with the particular care of people who'd seen something they didn't have context for. Moody hadn't moved from the front of the room. His magical eye was locked on Harry with the intensity of something that had given up pretending to rotate. Harry met it. He didn't look away. After a moment, Moody turned back to the class. Made a comment about Zabini's counter-curse form. The lesson continued. But the quality of Moody's attention for the rest of that class had shifted. It wasn't the interested collector feeling anymore. It was something more precise. More urgent. Harry filed it. He told Hermione and Daphne about Moody that evening, in the library. They'd established a rhythm over the past 3 days, the three of them converging in the library after dinner, in what had become an unspoken agreement, working through the grimoires and Daphne's family research notes and Hermione's library findings in an arrangement that was still careful but had stopped being hostile. The 18 inches of deliberate distance between Hermione and Daphne had reduced to about 12, which wasn't much but was measurable progress. Daphne's response to the Moody story was immediate and specific. "He's watching you too closely," she said. "He's always watched me closely," Harry said. "He's a paranoid XOR." "There's a difference between paranoid vigilance and targeted interest," Daphne said. "What you're describing is the second one. He's watching you the way someone watches something they have a use for." "You think he has an agenda," Hermione said, and her voice made it clear that she'd been thinking the same thing. "I think everyone in this situation has an agenda," Daphne said. "Dumbledore has one. Moody has one. The Ministry certainly has one." She looked at Harry. "The question is which ones are dangerous." "Moody's an Order member," Harry said. "He's on the right side." "That's not the same as his interests being aligned with yours specifically," Daphne said. "Being on the correct side of a war and wanting to use you as a weapon in it are not mutually exclusive." Harry was quiet. He thought about the magical eye's intensity. The collector's interest. He thought about the flask, the prosthetic leg, the 40 years of aura work that had left Moody with a face like a map of everything that had ever tried to kill him. "I'll be careful around him," he said. "More than careful," Daphne said. "Don't let him near you without witnesses." Hermione had been quiet during this exchange, but she'd been writing steadily, which with Hermione was a form of active thinking. She looked up now. "There's something else we need to talk about. The second task." "It's in February," Harry said. "It's in February and it involves recovering something that was taken from each champion," Hermione said. She looked at him carefully. "Given what's happened, the bond, I think we need to consider the possibility that what's been taken from you isn't singular." Harry looked at her. "You think they took both of you?" "I think the bond doesn't recognize a hierarchy of importance," Hermione said. "It identified 2 equal anchors. If the task is designed to take what matters most, then they took both," Daphne said. She said it without visible emotion, but something in her signal, the deep pressurized quality, spiked briefly before she contained it again. "Which means we're both at the bottom of the lake for the duration." "Which the judges will see," Hermione said. "Which everyone will see," Harry said. The three of them sat with this for a moment. "The bond goes public," Daphne said. "The bond goes very public," Hermione confirmed. Harry looked at the grimoire. He thought about his grandfather's note. "A Potter who fights his own magic loses. A Potter who moves with it wins." "Good," he said. Both of them looked at him. "The bond going public is fine," Harry said. "It means it stops being something we're managing in secret. It means, whatever Moody's planning, whatever Dumbledore is carefully not saying, whatever Voldemort is, Voldemort," Daphne said, very steadily, and the controlled way she said it told him she'd been practicing that. "Whatever he's working toward, all of it becomes harder when there are no more secrets to exploit." He looked between them. "Secrets are where the damage happens. You both know that." Hermione looked at him for a long moment. "You've thought about this more than you've been saying." "I've been reading," Harry said. "What does the grimoire say about external threats to a bond?" He opened Potesta's Viva to a page he'd marked. "Euphemia's green ink, the bond's greatest vulnerability in its early formation is not internal conflict but external disruption. A soul bond cannot be broken from within, only from without, and only if the parties at its center are kept separate or deceived. The simplest protection against interference, transparency. Magic that is witnessed is magic that cannot be denied." Hermione read it and sat back. She was writing about something specific, she said. Something that happened to them. I think so, Harry said. There are notes missing, some pages are damaged. But she comes back to this idea several times. He turned pages. Here again, do not let them make it shameful. There is nothing shameful in being known. The library was quiet around them. Madame Pance's distant footstep moved along the stacks. Daphne picked up the grimoire and read the passage herself. Her face was composed and doing its usual job of not showing much. But the signal in Harry's chest was warm and very clearly something, the particular feeling he'd come to associate with her when she was moved by something she hadn't expected. Your grandmother was remarkable, Daphne said. Yes, Harry said. He felt an ache about it that was new, he hadn't had room before to grieve people he'd never met. She was. Hermione reached over and turned to the next page. There was a full-page diagram there, something he hadn't gotten to yet. A circle with 3 points. Each point labeled in Euphemia's green ink, anchor. First fire. Deep water. All 3 of them looked at it. She knew, Hermione said quietly. She documented a dual bond scenario. She documented this scenario, Daphne said. Harry looked at the diagram. 3 points. A triangle in a circle. At the center of the circle, where the lines from all 3 points converged, his grandmother had written 2 words. Potestas libera. Free power. She wasn't writing theoretically, Harry said. No, Hermione said. She wasn't. Daphne looked at the diagram for a long moment. Fleamont Potter was bonded to 2 women, she said. That's what this looks like, Harry said. And the family never, Hermione started. Old families don't publicize irregularities, Daphne said. They document them privately and ensure the documentation is accessible only to those who need it. She looked at Harry. Your grandfather knew this would happen. Not to him, to you. He left these notes for you. He couldn't have known specifically that it would be me, Harry said. He knew it would be someone, Daphne said. Potter magic runs true. He understood his own core well enough to know what it would eventually produce. She paused. The books weren't in the vault at Gringotts. They were with Dumbledore. Who knew about them? The 3 of them arrived at the same implication simultaneously. Dumbledore knew this was a possibility, Hermione said. He knew it was a probability, Daphne corrected. Harry closed the grimoire. He sat very still for a moment, feeling the 2 signals in his chest, steady now, the collision largely resolved by the practice sessions and the open crack of his core, and thought about a very old man who kept things in a cabinet and said I intended to give them to you when I believed you were ready. Intended. Believed. Both words carrying enormous amounts of unspoken weight. Tomorrow morning, Harry said. Before breakfast. All 3 of us go see Dumbledore. He'll try to manage it, Daphne said. Yes, Harry said. He will. And? Hermione asked. And I'm done being managed. He looked at both of them. We go in knowing what we know. We don't let him set the terms of the conversation. We tell him what we found and we ask him directly what he's been planning. He looked at the grimoire. He wants to help, I believe that. But help on his terms, at his pace, with his curated version of the information. He shook his head. Not anymore. Hermione looked at him for a moment. You've changed, she said. Not with concern, with something more like recognition, the way you recognize a thing you've been watching slowly happen. I've been reading my grandmother's notes, he said. She'd have liked you, Daphne said. She picked up her own books, aligning their spines precisely. I'm certain of it. How are you certain? She looked at him steadily. Because she wrote this for you. You don't write like this for someone you'd only like. She tucked the books under her arm and stood. 7 tomorrow morning. Don't be late. She left. Harry watched her go, the deliberate quiet of her movement, the cool certainty of it. Hermione was watching him watch her, with an expression he couldn't quite read. For what it's worth, she said, she's right about the diagram. Euphemia knew exactly what she was building toward. Does it bother you? Harry asked. The idea that this was, in some sense, anticipated? By people who came before us? Hermione thought about it seriously, the way she thought about everything. It would bother me if it meant I had no agency, she said. If it was just, fate, on rails, nothing I chose. She looked at him. But I did choose. What I felt before last Friday was real and I chose to act on it. A pause. The magic just recognized a choice I'd already made. Harry looked at her. The first signal, Hermione's, was warm and very present. Go to sleep, she said. You need rest before we go at Dumbledore. You're doing the thing where you organize me out of a moment, he said. She stood and picked up her bag and said, with extraordinary dignity, I'm doing the thing where I make sure you're functional for tomorrow. There's a difference. At the door she paused. Harry. Yeah. I'm glad I kissed you. In the corridor. I'm glad. She left before he could answer. He sat in the library for a few minutes after that, with the diagram in front of him, 3 points, a triangle, Potesta's Libera at the center, and felt the 2 signals in his chest, both of them distinct and warm and increasingly, undeniably his, and thought about free power and what it actually meant to stop fighting your own nature. Outside, the castle settled into its evening sounds. A door somewhere. The wind. The distant lake. On the wall of the corridor outside the library, visible through the half-open door, the torchlight moved. Harry looked at it and didn't touch his wand, and the flame bent toward him, like a compass needle, like a thing that recognized something it had been waiting for. He let it. Chapter 4, Loyalties. Dumbledore was already awake when they arrived. This was not surprising. Harry had the distinct impression that Dumbledore was always already awake, that sleep was something the headmaster did as a courtesy to the concept rather than out of biological necessity. He was standing at the window when they came up the spiral stairs, looking out at the grounds with his hands folded behind his back, and he turned when they entered with the expression of someone who had been expecting them at precisely this time. Harry, he said. Then, with only a slight adjustment of his tone, Miss Granger. Miss Greengrass. Fawkes made his low sound from the perch. The portraits were awake, watching. Harry put the grimoire on the desk. He put it down squarely in the center, where Dumbledore's eyes went to it immediately, and then came back to Harry's face. You've read it, Dumbledore said. The diagram, Harry said. My grandmother's notes on a dual resonance bond. The 3-point configuration. He kept his voice even. You knew about this before it happened. The office was quiet. A clock ticked. Dumbledore looked at the grimoire for a moment and then sat down in his chair, and the weight with which he did it was not the weight of a man being caught out. It was the weight of a man who had been carrying something for a long time and had arrived at the moment of setting it down. Yes, he said. How long? Hermione asked. She was standing to Harry's left, her arms folded, with the precise posture of someone who has organized their anger into something useful. Since before Harry came to Hogwarts, Dumbledore said. Fleamont Potter brought those books to me himself, the year before he died. He had worked out the probability, not the certainty, but the probability, based on his understanding of the Potter Corps' behavior under specific conditions. He looked at Harry. He asked me to keep them safe and to give them to you when the time came. And the time came last Friday, Daphne said from Harry's right. She wasn't folding her arms. She was standing with her hands at her sides in a way that was somehow more intense than crossed arms, a stillness that communicated she was taking in every detail and would use all of it. But you didn't give them to him then. No, Dumbledore agreed. Why? Harry asked. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Because I hoped, he said, that what had happened might resolve naturally, before the full weight of it needed to be known. A soul bond in its early formation is fragile. I hoped that with distance, with time, you hoped it would fade, Harry said. I hoped the conflict between the two cores might create enough disruption to prevent the bond from stabilizing, Dumbledore said. I want to be honest about that. You hoped the collision would break it apart, Daphne said. It seemed the cleanest resolution, Dumbledore said. He said it without evasion, which Harry found he respected even while it made him furious. A three-point bond there is no precedent for what comes after. Your grandfather documented the formation, the mechanics, the early stages. He did not document what it becomes because he did not live long enough. He looked at Harry steadily. I did not know if you were ready for something with no map. That's not your decision, Harry said. No, Dumbledore said. You're right. It isn't. The portraits on the walls were very still. Phineas Nigellus had his chin in his hand with the expression of a man watching something he hadn't seen in a long time. There's something else, Hermione said. The external threat. The grimoire mentions that bonds in formation are specifically vulnerable to outside disruption. Given the tournament, given Voldemort's, she stopped for exactly 1 second and continued, given Voldemort's interest in Harry, this isn't a theoretical vulnerability. Someone could try to use the bond against him. Yes, Dumbledore said. He looked at Hermione with the specific respect he reserved for people who made logical leaps without being prompted. That is the other thing I should tell you. Tell us now, Harry said. Dumbledore rose and moved to the cabinet, not the one with the books, a different one, and removed a shallow stone basin that Harry recognized immediately. The pensieve. He set it on the desk beside the grimoire. 3 weeks ago, Dumbledore said, I received intelligence from a source I trust completely that Voldemort is aware something has changed in Harry's magical signature. Not the specifics, he doesn't know about the bond. But he can sense, through means I won't detail, that Harry's core has shifted in ways that interest him. He paused. He is sending someone to investigate. Someone already here, Daphne said. Dumbledore looked at her. He wouldn't send someone in response to new information, Daphne said. He'd use an asset already in place. Someone who had access before the tournament began and has had time to observe. She held Dumbledore's gaze. Who in this castle is not who they say they are, Professor? A silence that was several seconds long. I have a suspicion, Dumbledore said carefully. Not a confirmed identification. I don't wish to name, Moody, Harry said. Dumbledore stopped. Or something wearing Moody, Harry said. I've felt it. The way he watches, it's not protection. It's assessment. He watches me the way someone watches something they're planning to use. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. Something moved in the old man's expression, and Harry read it with the clarity that the partially open core had given him. It was the expression of someone discovering that the person they'd been protecting had, at some point without announcement, stopped needing that particular kind of protection. I cannot confirm or deny that at present, Dumbledore said. Without evidence, naming him would alert whoever it is that they've been identified. So we proceed carefully, Daphne said. We proceed very carefully, Dumbledore agreed. What we don't do, Harry said, is let you manage it alone. From here on, anything that relates to the bond, to the tournament, to Voldemort's interest in me, we're part of that conversation. All three of us. He held Dumbledore's gaze. I'm not asking. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. At Hermione to his left and Daphne to his right. At the grimoire on his desk and the pensieve beside it. At 14 years of careful management meeting something that had outgrown the container he'd built for it. No, Dumbledore said quietly. I don't suppose you are. He sat back down. Then let us talk about what we know. They were in the office for 2 hours. Dumbledore talked with a directness that Harry suspected he'd been hoarding for years, parceling it out in careful doses to someone he'd considered not ready and had been revising that assessment of, incrementally, since September. He confirmed that Voldemort was not yet fully corporeal, that he was operating through intermediaries, through Pettigrew, through an elaborate plan that required the tournament as its infrastructure. He confirmed that the third task was the critical point, not the second, and that whatever was planned would require Harry specifically, in a specific place, at a specific time. He confirmed that Bartemius Crouch Jr. was his primary suspect for the person inside Moody's form, and that Polyjuice Potion sustained over this length of time required a level of dedication that was either impressive or deeply alarming depending on how you looked at it. Crouch Jr. was a Death Eater, Hermione said, her quill moving. He was convicted. Azkaban. And released, apparently, Daphne said, by his father. Under circumstances that Cornelius Fudge will be extremely reluctant to acknowledge. She said Fudge's name the way her family probably said it, with the particular resigned contempt of people who had watched the ministry make its preferred choices for decades. Bartemius Crouch Sr. has been behaving erratically all term. Missing from the judge's table. Sending his house elf. You notice that, Dumbledore said. My family attends to ministry affairs closely, Daphne said, without further explanation. Dumbledore looked at her with the expression he'd used on Hermione earlier, the specific respect of a man recalibrating a person's usefulness upward. Daphne received it with complete composure and did not acknowledge it, which Harry suspected was exactly the right response. The bond, Hermione said, moving forward, is going to be exposed in the second task. We've worked that out already. She looked at Dumbledore. 2 hostages instead of 1. The judges will see it. Yes, Dumbledore said. He had the expression of someone for whom this was not new information. I've been considering how to manage, he caught Harry's expression and adjusted, how to address that when it becomes visible. Don't, Harry said. Don't address it. Don't manage it. Euphemia's notes, transparency is the protection. When it's witnessed it can't be denied or used against us. Dumbledore was quiet. The public response to a soul bond of this configuration will be complicated and unpleasant and survivable, Harry said. I've managed unpleasant public responses since I was 11. I can manage one more. He looked at Hermione and Daphne. We all can. Hermione nodded once. Daphne looked out the window. The Greengrass family will have opinions, she said. Loud ones. She seemed to be working something out privately. My parents will be, it will require a conversation. Will they be a problem? Harry asked. She looked at him. They'll be a concern, she said. Not a problem. There's a difference. Something settled in her face, a decision quietly made. I'll write to them today. As will I, Hermione said, to mine. A pause that had something quietly enormous in it. They don't have context for any of this. They won't know what a soul bond is. Tell them the truth, Harry said. That's your strategy? Tell everyone the truth? My grandmother's strategy, he said. And yes. Hermione looked at him for a moment. It's terrifying, she said. Most good strategies are, Daphne said, and Hermione looked at her, and something passed between them that Harry couldn't quite name, the first flash of genuine recognition between two people who had been carefully not recognizing each other. It lasted about 2 seconds and then they both looked away, but it had happened. Harry filed it under things that were going better than expected. Cedric Diggory found Harry after lunch. He came across the courtyard where Harry was sitting on a stone bench with the second grimoire, moving with his characteristic lack of drama, and dropped onto the bench beside him with the easy confidence of someone who has decided to say something and is going to say it. I need to tell you something, Cedric said. Harry closed the book. Okay. I've been watching Moody. Cedric said it quietly, without preamble. Since the start of term, actually. There's something wrong with him. He looked at Harry steadily. I've spoken to the real Moody. Once, at a ministry event 2 years ago. For about 4 minutes. He paused. And I know this sounds odd, but the person teaching us, the body language is wrong. Mad-Eye Moody was terrifying because he had the stillness of someone who'd survived 40 years of ambush by being absolutely still. This one moves like someone performing stillness. It's a very good performance. But it's a performance. Harry looked at him. Have you told anyone? I tried to tell my head of house last week. Professor Sprout took me very seriously and said she'd look into it. Cedric's mouth tightened slightly. I haven't heard back. She probably went to Dumbledore, Harry said. And Dumbledore probably, Cedric stopped. Has a plan. He always has a plan, Harry said. The problem is he keeps it to himself until the dramatic moment. Cedric was quiet for a moment. He looked at the grimoire in Harry's lap with the polite non-inquiry of someone who notices things and chooses not to press. Is everything all right with you? Beyond the tournament. Harry considered him. Cedric Diggory was, he'd decided, genuinely what he appeared to be, which was sufficiently rare at Hogwarts to be worth noting. He was good and honest and clever in a way that didn't announce itself, and his instinct to bring information to Harry rather than to an institution was exactly the kind of loyalty without politics that Harry had a limited supply of in his life. Not entirely, Harry said. There's something happening with my magic. Something complicated. He watched Cedric's face. Connected to the tournament. Someone put your name in the goblet, Cedric said. Someone with a reason to want you in the tournament. Not just any champion, you specifically. Yes. And Moody, whoever is wearing Moody, has been watching you with the specific attention of someone who has a use for you. Cedric looked at the grimoire again. Harry. What are they actually planning? A ritual, Harry said. Something that needs me present and accessible. Vulnerable. The third task. That's what we think. Cedric sat with this. The courtyard was half populated, students moving through in pairs and groups, oblivious. The November sun was doing its best with the Scottish sky, which wasn't much. A pigeon was being menaced by a second year near the fountain. What can I do? Cedric asked. Harry looked at him. You can keep watching Moody, he said. Note anything specific, times he's absent from his office, times the magical eye behaves differently than usual. He drinks from a flask constantly. If you can ever see what's actually in it, polyjuice needs to be taken every hour to maintain the transformation, Hermione had told him. He passed that along. Cedric absorbed it with the quick comprehensive attention of someone connecting dots he'd already laid out. Every hour, Cedric said. That means he has a source inside the school. Or he's making it himself. His office, Harry said. He'd need somewhere to store ingredients and a constant supply. He looked at Cedric. I'm not suggesting you break into, I'm a Hufflepuff, Cedric said. We're famously good at finding things through perfectly legitimate means. He stood. I'll be careful. Be very careful, Harry said. Whoever is in there, he's capable and he's been doing this for months without anyone catching him. Don't underestimate that. Cedric nodded. He paused before he left, looking down at Harry with an expression that was thoughtful and a little careful. Can I ask one more thing? Yeah. Daphne Greengrass was seen going into the library at 7 this morning, Cedric said, in the tone of someone who has excellent information networks and is being tactful about how he deploys them. And Hermione Granger was seen coming out of Dumbledore's office with you and Daphne this morning. He paused. Half of Hufflepuff has questions and I told them all to mind their business. Thank you, Harry said. Is there anything you want me to say if people ask? Which they will. Harry thought about transparency as protection. About his grandmother's ink on old parchment, do not let them make it shameful. Tell them, Harry said, that whatever they're wondering about, it's real, and it's nobody's business, and it's under control. He paused. The last part being the most important. Cedric studied him. Is it? Under control? Getting there, Harry said. Cedric left. Harry opened the grimoire again. On the page he'd been on, his grandfather Fleamont had written a note so small it was almost a footnote, in the brown ink that Harry was coming to recognize with something that felt like fondness. You'll know the right allies by what they do with the truth when you give them pieces of it. Harry looked at the space where Cedric had been sitting. He turned the page. Defense class on Thursday was a study in controlled surveillance. Harry arrived knowing that whatever was behind Moody's face was going to be watching him carefully after Tuesday's incident with the shields. He arrived also knowing, from 3 days of careful grimoire work, that his core was more open than it had been and more sensitive, and that this made him both more powerful and more readable to anyone who knew what to look for. The lesson was on unforgivables. Not practical work, that had been done earlier in the term, but theory and identification, Moody writing detection signatures on the board with his back to the room for long stretches, which Harry suspected was intentional. The magical eye needed no particular angle. Harry sat in the middle of the room, where he could see everything. He watched Moody the way Moody watched him, not with the paranoid swiveling vigilance of the real aura, but with the quiet lateral attention that the open core had given him. Magical signatures had texture. He'd been learning this. Hermione's was high heat and expanding. Daphne's was pressurized and deep. His own was, he was still working out a vocabulary for it. Moody's was wrong. Not wrong like a bad spell or a botched potion. Wrong the way a room smells wrong when something is hidden in it, something underneath the surface reading that didn't match the architecture. The magical signature of a body was as individual as a fingerprint, and what Harry was sensing from Moody's direction was a signature being performed over a different one. Like a painting hung over another painting. The surface read as Moody. Underneath it, suppressed but not eliminated, was something that had an entirely different quality. Sharper. Colder. And, Harry sat very still at this, familiar. He'd felt that specific cold sharpness before. Not from a person. From a memory. The corridor during third year. The moment a Dementor had boarded the Hogwarts Express. Not identical, not the numbing soul cold of a Dementor. But the same family. Dark magic. Old, practiced, devoted dark magic, worn in the bones of whoever was underneath the Moody face like a second skeleton. He needed to say nothing about this in the classroom. He needed to write it down for Hermione and Daphne, and he needed to tell Dumbledore, and he needed to do none of these things right now in front of whatever was wearing Moody. Potter. Moody's voice from the front of the room. Detection signature for the Imperious Curse, what's the distinguishing characteristic? The subject shows no magical resistance, Harry said. Their core goes passive. Fully receptive rather than its natural equilibrium of outward and inward flow. He paused. Unless the subject has an unusually strong core, in which case the passive suppression is incomplete and you get micro-resistances. Involuntary ones. The classroom was quiet. That had been a more specific answer than the textbook gave. Moody's real eye was on him. The magical eye had stopped moving entirely. Where did you read that? Moody asked. Family research, Harry said. A beat. Useful family. Moody turned back to the board. 5 points to Gryffindor. Nothing else happened in defense that could be called dramatic. But when the class ended and the room was emptying, Harry held back deliberately, adjusting his bag, until he was the last one out, and as he passed the front of the room he let the open crack of his core do its quiet ambient work, reading the space. The signature under Moody's was clearer this close. Dark. Devoted. capable of sustaining an enormous lie for months with the specific endurance of someone who had been practicing single-minded devotion since before Harry was born. He walked out of the classroom with this sitting in his chest alongside Hermione and Daphne's signals, and by the time he reached the corridor he'd decided. Tonight. He was going to Dumbledore tonight, alone, with this specific information, and he was going to watch Dumbledore's face when he said it to see what the old man actually knew. He ran into Ron outside the Great Hall. Since the reconciliation after the first task, they'd been rebuilding something that was in the process of finding its new shape. Ron had never been good at complex emotional territory, he was brilliant at chess and strategy and certain kinds of loyalty, and he handled feelings the way he handled things he didn't know the rules for, by making them familiar as fast as possible. "Heard you and Hermione were in Dumbledore's office this morning," Ron said, falling into step beside him. "Yes," Harry said. "Everything all right?" "Working on it." "Was Daphne Greengrass was she there?" "Yes," Harry said. Ron was quiet for a moment in the way that meant he was deciding whether to ask the thing he actually wanted to ask. They pushed through the Great Hall doors together and the noise of dinner wrapped around them. "Is something going on with you and Greengrass?" Harry got a plate and put food on it with the deliberate calm of someone choosing their words carefully. "Something is going on," he said. "It's complicated and I'll explain it properly when I've got enough room to explain it properly." He looked at Ron. "But yes." Ron took this in. His ears had gone slightly red. "And Hermione?" "Also yes," Harry said. Ron stared at him. "Both of them." It's not what you're imagining," Harry started, and then stopped, and then said, "Actually, it might be partly what you're imagining. But it's also more than that and different from that, and I need an evening that isn't about explaining it before I can explain it." Ron opened his mouth. Closed it. Looked at his plate. Looked at Hermione, who was 2 seats down with her notes beside her soup, and then at the Slytherin table, where Daphne was sitting with her usual composure, and then back at Harry. "Right," Ron said. "Right," Harry said. "Both of them," Ron said again, quietly, to himself, with the expression of a man recalibrating something significant. Then he picked up his fork and said, "Are you going to eat that?" "It's on my plate," Harry said. "I know, I was just," Ron stopped himself. "Never mind." He ate his dinner with the focused energy of someone using food as a processing mechanism, and Harry let him, and it was almost normal. Almost was enough, Harry thought. For now. He looked up and found Daphne watching him from across the Great Hall. He felt her signal, the deep, pressurized warmth. She raised an eyebrow. "Everything all right?" Without words, just the slight lift of one brow and the quality of the question in the signal itself. He gave a small nod. She looked back at her plate. Hermione, to his left, had noticed the exchange with the specific awareness of someone who felt it through a magical connection and was choosing not to comment. She passed him the bread rolls with a precision that said quite a lot about what she was feeling and how she was choosing to handle it. "Thanks," Harry said. She said, and returned to her notes. He went to Dumbledore after dinner. This time he did knock. There was a difference between asserting that he wouldn't be managed and simple rudeness, and Harry had no particular interest in the latter. Dumbledore called him in, and Harry came up the stairs and through the door, and this time he did sit down. He sat down because what he had to say needed to be said at the same level and in the same register as a conversation between two people who respected each other's intelligence. "The person inside Moody's form," Harry said. "They're a dark magic practitioner. Old and dedicated. I can feel the signature through the polyjuice." He watched Dumbledore's face. "And I want to know if you've confirmed it's Crouch Jr." Dumbledore looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "Cedric Diggory came to me last week," he said. "With observations very similar to yours, though less specific. And? I have not yet confirmed it." Dumbledore's voice was careful. "I believe it, yes. I am working on a means of confirmation that does not alert him. How much time do we have before he acts? I believe the third task is his primary operational window, Dumbledore said. Between now and June, he needs the champions to progress. He has been facilitating your progression, the hints about the second task that will come your way soon. He looked at Harry. I expect you'll receive a hint shortly. The prefect's bathroom. Solve the egg. You're telling me directly. You were going to figure it out regardless, Dumbledore said, with something in his voice that was both wry and warm. And I am, making an effort to close the gap. Harry looked at him. The gap between what you know and what you tell me. Yes. Dumbledore held his gaze. I won't pretend it closes easily. I have managed information for 70 years as a primary survival strategy. It has become something of a reflex. Work on it, Harry said. I am, Dumbledore said. Harry believed him, provisionally, in the way you believe things that are true even when the person saying them has given you reason to be cautious. He stood. One more thing. Yes? The dark magic signature under Moody's polyjuice, Harry said. There's something about it I can't place. It has the quality of someone who has been devoting their magic to a single cause for a very long time. The way magic becomes when it's been pointed in one direction so consistently it loses the ability to point anywhere else. He looked at Dumbledore. What does devoted dark magic feel like, to someone sensitive to it? Dumbledore was quiet. Like you've described, he said carefully. Narrow. Intense. The magic of someone for whom the cause has become more real than the self. A pause. Where did you encounter that description? I felt it, Harry said. Today. In defense. Something moved in Dumbledore's face. You felt his signature through the polyjuice. My core is more sensitive than it was, Harry said simply. Yes, Dumbledore said quietly. It is. He looked at Harry with the expression that Harry had been reading more clearly recently, the one that sat between pride and grief, between the satisfaction of watching something grow into its power and the awareness of everything that had been paid to get here. Harry. Yeah. Your parents would, he started, and then stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. He looked out the window at the evening grounds instead. Harry let it be unfinished. There were some things that didn't need completing. He went back down the spiral stairs and out into the corridor. The castle was in its evening settling, students moving toward common rooms, torches burning, the particular quality of sound that Hogwarts made when it was full and warm and alive. He stood in it for a moment and felt both signals, distant but steady, and felt the crack in his core, and felt the grimoire's weight under his arm where he'd brought it along without really deciding to. He thought about Crouch Jr. in there, behind Moody's face, drinking polyjuice every hour, pointing his whole self at a cause for so long that nothing else remained. He thought about what it meant to have people worth pointing yourself toward. He thought about the diagram in Euphemia's notes. 3 points. A triangle in a circle. Potestas Libera. He went to find Hermione and Daphne. They were in the 4th floor classroom. He'd known they would be, both signals had shifted here earlier in the evening, and coming to find them had felt as natural as coming home, which was something he was still getting used to feeling. They were sitting on opposite sides of a transfigured table. Daphne had done something to an old desk that was either excellent transfiguration or an act of aesthetic frustration, turning it into a low dark wood table that was considerably nicer than its origin, with books spread between them and a map of the castle that Hermione had drawn from memory on a large sheet of parchment. We've been working on the Moody problem, Hermione said, without looking up. I went to Dumbledore, Harry said, sitting down. We know, Daphne said. We felt you go. She looked up. What did he say? Harry told them. The confirmation that it was Crouch Jr., the third task as the operational window, the hint about the egg. He told them about the dark magic signature, the devoted to a cause quality of it. He told them Dumbledore was working on confirmation without alerting Crouch. Hermione had been writing through most of this. If the third task is the critical point, she said, then between now and June, Crouch needs Harry functional and progressing. He won't move against you directly before then. She looked up. But he might move against people connected to you. The room went quiet. Us, Daphne said. If he figures out about the bond, Hermione said, and if someone has told Voldemort that Harry's core has shifted, they might not know the specifics but they'll investigate. And if they investigate and find a dual anchor bond, she stopped. The bond is a vulnerability, Daphne said. If someone disrupts the connected cores from outside, the collision gets worse, Harry said. Not just uncomfortable. Dangerous. The solution is still the same, Daphne said. Transparency. Make it witnessed. Make it undeniable. She looked at Harry. The second task. February, Hermione said. That's our window. Until then, Daphne said, we are careful. Specifically around Moody. She looked at the castle map. We vary our routes. We don't meet alone in places he has easy access to. We keep Dumbledore informed but we make our own decisions. She paused. And we develop the bond's stability before it goes public. If the three-point configuration is as strong in practice as it is in theory, it's stronger, Harry said. Both of them looked at him. I felt it when we were all in the same room in the library on Sunday, he said. The collision stopped. The pressure equalized. He looked at them both. The bond's conflict isn't between your two cores directly. It's because my core is trying to accommodate both poles at once without enough space. When all three of us are in proximity, it has enough space, Hermione said quietly. The 3 points complete the circuit, Daphne said. Harry nodded. Which means the more stable we make the 3-point configuration, practically, day to day, just being in the same space and not fighting it, the less vulnerable we are to outside disruption. Hermione looked at Daphne. Daphne looked at Hermione. It was not a warm look, they were not there yet, not warm with each other, but it was honest, and Harry had come to understand that honest was more valuable than warm in the long run. We study together, Hermione said. Every evening. We include Cedric in what we know about Moody, Daphne said. He's already watching. He's an asset. And the egg, Hermione said, turning to Harry. Solve it this week. Before the second task is any closer. Prefect's bathroom, Harry said. Dumbledore mentioned it. Then go tonight, Hermione said. The less time between now and knowing what the second task involves, the more time we have to prepare. Together, Daphne said. Together, Hermione confirmed, and looked at the word as it came out of her own mouth with the expression of someone surprised by how easily it arrived. Daphne picked up her quill. There's something else, she said, in the tone of someone who has been holding something back long enough to have decided on the angle of approach. My father wrote back this morning. Harry looked at her. He has concerns, she said. The word did heavy lifting. The Greengrass family has political relationships that make a high-profile soul bond, particularly one involving a Gryffindor and the boy who lived, something that requires management. Is he going to be a problem? Harry asked. He kept his voice even and his tone was simply asking for information, not tensing for a fight. He's going to try to arrange a meeting, Daphne said. Before Christmas. He wants to assess the situation personally. She held Harry's gaze. He's not a Death Eater. I want to be clear about that. The Greengrasses have kept their distance from Voldemort's inner circle deliberately, through calculated neutrality, which is not the same as being on the correct side but is significantly less dangerous than some of the alternatives available to a wealthy pure-blood family in 1980. Calculated neutrality, Hermione said. It's what it is, Daphne said, without apology. But my father's primary concern in any situation is the family's strategic position. A soul bond is an uncontrolled variable. She paused. He'll come expecting to manage it. And we won't let him, Harry said. No, Daphne said. We won't. Something in her voice had a quality that Harry was learning to identify as the specific warmth Daphne Greengrass expressed when she had decided something without reservation. He's my father and I love him, and he is going to meet you exactly as you are and accept it, because the alternative is losing me, and that is not something he's willing to risk. Silence. Hermione was looking at Daphne with the expression of someone who has revised an assessment significantly. Daphne went back to her notes as if she hadn't said anything particularly remarkable. Harry felt the deep water signal in his chest, warm and steady and enormous, and thought about the word devoted. About how it looked when it went dark, like Crouch Jr.'s magic, pointed at a cause until the self dissolved. And how it looked like this, like Daphne's signal right now, like Hermione's 3 days ago in the library, like two fires in a hearth that was getting bigger. Outside the windows, the castle's evening had become full dark. Stars were visible through the glass, sharp and cold and very far away. Harry looked at the diagram in the grimoire. 3 points. A triangle. Right, he said. Let's solve the egg. Chapter 5, The second task. The egg screamed. Harry had figured this out in the prefect's bathroom 3 weeks ago. The golden egg, submerged in the enormous rose-scented bath, had opened its halves and produced not a scream but a song. Eerie and mournful and beautiful in the way things are beautiful when they're also a little threatening, a chorus of voices that Hermione had identified immediately as mere people. Come seek us where our voices sound, we cannot sing above the ground, and while you're searching, ponder this, we've taken what you'll sorely miss. She had identified this in the bathroom at 11:30 at night, sitting on the edge of the bath fully clothed with her feet dangling over the water, with Daphne sitting beside her at exactly the same distance and Harry in the water below them, which had been, objectively, one of the stranger Thursday evenings of his life. An hour long you'll have to look, and recover what we took. Gillyweed, Daphne had said, the moment Hermione finished transcribing the words. Or a bubblehead charm, Hermione said. Gillyweed is more reliable under pressure, Daphne said. Bubblehead requires sustained concentration on two things simultaneously while operating in a hostile environment. Gillyweed is biochemical. It runs itself. The potion stores here won't have it. No, Daphne said. But I know where to get it. And she had, 2 days later, produced a small quantity of gray-green plant matter from a package that arrived by owl with no return address and a note in a handwriting that Harry didn't recognize, and handed it to him with the directness of someone crossing an item off a list. She hadn't explained where it came from. He hadn't asked, because the signal in his chest when she'd given it to him had carried the specific quality of someone who had used a resource they'd been saving and done it without hesitation. That had been 6 weeks ago. Now it was the 24th of February, and Harry was standing at the edge of the Black Lake in the grey pre-dawn cold with the gillyweed in his pocket and both signals in his chest and a very specific cold certainty about what he was going to find in the water. The champion's tent was 50 yards behind him. Inside it, Fleur Delacour was pacing and Victor Crumb was doing the still and focused thing that he did when he was preparing for something, and Cedric was warming up with deliberate methodical precision. Harry had come out earlier because the tent had the particular quality of pre-task anxiety that he found constricting, and also because he'd wanted 2 minutes of quiet. The lake was black this early. The stands were filling with the sound of 700 students and assorted guests finding their seats, the noise of it traveling across the water in fragments. The sky was that particular February gray that couldn't decide between clouds and clearing. He felt Hermione and Daphne before he saw them. Both signals shifted, coming closer, and he turned before they rounded the corner of the tent and found them walking toward him together, which still struck him as remarkable, not because they were enemies, but because 6 weeks ago they'd been circling each other with the careful distance of two people deciding whether they were enemies, and they weren't anymore. They weren't friends yet, that was a different thing and would take longer, but they were something that had its own specific quality. Two people bonded by the same third person, finding out what that meant when neither of them was trying to win. Hermione was in her Gryffindor scarf and gloves. Daphne was in dark grey, which Harry was coming to understand was her default when she wasn't in school robes, practical and neat and chosen without vanity for warmth and function. "You're early," Hermione said. "Needed air," Harry said. "We know," Daphne said. "We felt you come out here." She stopped beside him and looked at the lake. "How long do you think before they announce it?" 20 minutes. Maybe 30. He looked at both of them. "You know what I'm going to say." "That we shouldn't worry," Hermione said. "That you've trained for this," Daphne said. "That you'll be fine," Hermione finished. Harry looked between them. "Were you practicing that?" "We have a bond with someone who is about to dive into a freezing lake in February to rescue us from mere people," Hermione said. "We've had several weeks to anticipate this conversation." "The gillyweed will last an hour," Daphne said. "The lake is deep but not so deep that an hour is insufficient. The mere people are," she paused, "territorial but not aggressive toward champions who are here for the task." "I've read the same sources," Hermione said. "Then we both know he'll be fine," Daphne said, and her voice had that quality it got when she was saying something she fully believed and was not going to elaborate on. She looked at the lake. Being fine and being worried are not mutually exclusive. "No," Hermione agreed, quietly. Harry looked at both of them for a moment. He thought about what was going to happen in the next 2 hours, the two of them at the bottom of the lake, the stands full of people, the judges at their table. Dumbledore's words in the office last week, "The bond will be visible. There is no concealing two hostages where there should be one." He'd said it without urgency, which meant he'd accepted Harry's position on transparency. "After this," Harry said, "it's public. Whatever happens, the bond, all of it. People will see." "I know," Hermione said. "I'm ready," Daphne said. "My father is in the stands," Daphne added, after a beat. Harry looked at her. "Is he?" "He arrived last night. I told you he wanted a meeting before Christmas. He delayed." She kept her voice very even. "He's brought my mother. They'll see everything. Are you all right with that?" She looked at him with the particular look she had when she found a question simultaneously simple and enormous. "I made my choice at the lake in November," she said. "With full intention. I don't revise choices." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he reached over and took her hand, not dramatically, just the simple fact of it, and she let him, her fingers lacing through his with the same deliberate quality she brought to everything. Hermione, to his other side, was looking at the lake with her jaw very slightly set. He took her hand too. She held it immediately, the grip tight and warm, and let out a breath that had been held for some time. The three of them stood at the edge of the lake for a minute, maybe two, while the stands filled behind them and the February cold moved off the water, and it was almost peaceful. 1 hour, Harry said. "We'll be there when you come up," Hermione said. "Yes," Daphne said simply, and the word carried the weight of someone for whom a promise made was a promise kept without further discussion. Bagman's voice, when it came, was loud enough to reach them across the grounds. "Champions, to the starting line. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second task of the Triwizard Tournament." Harry squeezed both their hands once and let go and walked back toward the starting line. He didn't look back. He knew both signals precisely, Hermione's warm and controlled and covering something that was not controlled at all, Daphne's deep and contained and underneath it something wide open that she would never say aloud in a crowd. Cedric fell into step beside him as they approached the bank. "Ready?" Cedric said. "Are you?" Harry said. Cedric gave a slight smile. "I've been practicing Bubblehead since November. Hermione told me it required concentration." He glanced at Harry sideways. "She also told me I should practice it until it was automatic." Which I think was her way of saying she was worried I wasn't good enough. It was her way of saying she likes you, Harry said. She only gives technical advice to people she respects. Cedric looked mildly surprised. Right. A pause. Cho's down there. My hostage. I know. I'll get her up, Cedric said, mildly but firmly. You'll have enough to manage. Harry didn't argue. The starting line was a platform extending over the water. The 4 champions lined up with the particular quality of people who had prepared as much as preparation allowed and were now at the place where preparation ended and action began. Fleur was vibrating with tight-coiled energy. Krum had the complete stillness of a machine waiting to be switched on. Cedric was calm in the way people are calm when they've done the work and know it. Harry looked at the water. He popped the gillyweed into his mouth. It tasted like something that had been left in a swamp for too long, which it was, and within 30 seconds the familiar transformation began, gills splitting open on his neck, the particular breathlessness before the gills activated, his feet flattening and his hands growing their translucent webbing. He'd tested a small piece 6 weeks ago to confirm the transformation worked on him. He had not enjoyed it, but it had worked. Bagman counted down. On 0, Harry stepped off the platform and went under. The lake in February was black-green and cold in the way that had very little to do with temperature and everything to do with depth. Light from the surface reached maybe 15 feet down before it gave up. Below that was a darkness that had the quality of something old and very large thinking very slowly. Harry went down. He could feel both signals clearly even through the water, which was something he hadn't been certain of in advance and which was reassuring in a practical way. They were below him, significantly below, in the directional sense the bond gave him. He angled down and swam. The gillyweed was extraordinary once it stopped being unpleasant. He moved through the water with a speed and efficiency that his human body had no precedent for, the webbed hands and feet doing exactly what they were designed to do, and his gills working with a quiet biological certainty that required nothing from him consciously. The lake opened up around him as he descended, rock formations, forests of dark weed, the occasional enormous shadow that might have been the giant squid and might have been something else. He had an hour. He went toward the signals. The Merepeople settlement was visible from 100 yards out, formations of stone that were too regular to be natural, arranged with the specific geometry of construction rather than geology. Pale light filtered from within it, some bioluminescent source, casting the underwater settlement in blue-green. The Merepeople themselves were visible as he approached, watching him from a distance with the particular expression of beings who do not find humans impressive but are willing to be civil about it. He found the hostages in the settlement center. They were tied to a stone column with thick strands of weed, hovering in the water slightly above the lake floor, their hair moving in the slow current, entirely still. Asleep by magical means, their faces peaceful in the particular way of people who have been made very temporarily unconcerned about everything. Cho Chang. A young boy he didn't recognize, someone from Beau's Batons, Fleur's hostage. Victor Krum's hostage, also unfamiliar, a girl from Durmstrang. And then, to the left of the column, tied separately on shorter weed strands, side by side, Hermione and Daphne. Both of them. Harry went still in the water for a moment, floating, taking it in. They were perfectly still, both of them, drifting slightly in the current. Hermione's hair was extraordinary underwater, spread out in every direction, as uncontrollable as ever, a dark cloud around her face. Daphne's was loose, lighter, moving in long slow waves. Both of them had the same peaceful expression, the absence of the specific intentional composure they each maintained while awake, their faces relaxed into something younger and more unguarded. He felt both signals, steady and slow, the quality of deep sleep rather than danger. They were fine. They were safe. They were tied to a column at the bottom of a lake in February, which was an objectively alarming situation, but the bond told him they were fine in the way the bond was telling him things now, with a clarity that had been developing since November. He went to them. The weed strands cut easily with a sharpened piece of stone that one of the mere people had left conveniently near the column. He suspected this was intentional, some form of silent sporting assistance, and he was grateful for it. He freed Hermione first, caught her as she drifted loose, kept hold of her wrist. Then Daphne, her hand coming free of the weed and her body lifting slightly in the water toward the surface above. He took hold of both of them. He was strong in the water. The gillyweed was a remarkable piece of magical biology, and the lake was deep but not impossible, and he had 40 minutes remaining on the hour. He went up. The ascent was long and quiet, and he didn't think about the stands above or the judges or the fact that what was about to surface from the Black Lake was going to require a great deal of explaining. He thought about the weight of both of them in his hands, the steady signals in his chest, the way the bioluminescence of the Mere People's settlement had looked from above as he rose, a pale blue-green star at the bottom of the dark water. He thought about his grandmother's diagram. 3 points in a circle. He thought, yes, this is it. This is what she meant. He broke the surface 11 minutes before the hour was up. The sound hit him first, the stands, which had been watching the water for visible movement, erupting as the Hogwarts champion came up with not one hostage but two, an arm around each, bringing them both to the surface in a single broad motion. He heard the noise without separating it into meaning, focused entirely on getting to the bank. The gillyweed transformation reversed itself as he moved through the shallower water, gills closing, webbing retracting, his feet regaining their human shape on the lake's sandy floor. He walked the last 20 feet, supporting both Hermione and Daphne as they began to stir, the magical sleep dissipating as they emerged from the lake's particular enchantment. Hermione woke first. She woke the way she did everything, quickly and completely, going from unconscious to fully alert within 3 seconds, her first words being, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Harry said. "How deep, deep," he said. "But manageable. Can you stand?" "Yes." She got her feet under her, water streaming from her hair and her clothes, and looked at Daphne, who was waking more slowly, in the particular way that deeply self-composed people sometimes came back to consciousness, like something very ordered and contained reassembling itself deliberately. Daphne opened her eyes. Looked at Harry. Looked at Hermione. Looked at the bank, where people were watching with the particular quality of a crowd that has seen something it didn't expect and hasn't processed it yet. "Both of us," she said. "Both of you," Harry confirmed. She absorbed this. Something moved across her face, complex and quick and entirely unperformed. Then she got her feet under her and stood, and her composure came back on like a light, and she looked at the bank with complete equanimity, as though surfacing from a lake with Harry Potter and Hermione Granger in front of several hundred witnesses was an entirely ordinary way to spend a Tuesday morning. They waded to the bank. The noise from the stands was enormous and confused, half of it the specific excitement of something unexpected, half of it the particular murmur of people trying to make sense of something outside their framework. Harry could see the judges' table from here, and the judges themselves had the expressions of people confronted with a scenario their briefing materials hadn't covered. Bagman looked delighted. The ministry representative looked alarmed. Dumbledore looked unsurprised and possibly, very slightly, relieved. Madame Pomfrey descended on all three of them with warming charms and blankets and the expression of someone who had added a new category to her mental file marked Potter, H. Complications. "All three of you, sit down," she said, in a voice that managed to be both directive and gently incredulous. Harry sat. Hermione sat beside him. Daphne sat on his other side, accepting a blanket with a murmur of thanks, and for a moment the three of them were simply sitting on the bank in February with wet hair and Pomfrey fussing and the entire Triwizard audience trying to work out what had just happened. Cedric surfaced 20 yards to their left with Cho, who was awake and confused and then very much not confused when she saw Cedric, and very warmly fine. Crumb surfaced after, with the Durmstrang girl. Fleur didn't surface. She'd been unable to get past the Grindylows in the shallower water, and her hostage had been brought up by the Mere People themselves when the time limit was approached. The points were announced 20 minutes later. Harry had scored 45 out of 50, the judges had debated the two hostages with the visible discomfort of people calculating points without a rubric, and Dumbledore's single clear voice in the discussion had apparently been the tipping point toward generosity. Second task leader. He barely heard it. What he heard was the conversation that happened at the judges' table 30 minutes after scoring, which he attended because Dumbledore had quietly suggested he should, and which had the quality of a hearing that was pretending to be a debriefing. The ministry representative, a man called Weatherby whom no one had explained to Harry in advance, had the expression of someone who had been sent here to observe a routine international sporting event and had been confronted instead with a magical phenomenon his department didn't have a form for. The tournament charter, Weatherby said, for the third time, specifies one hostage per champion. 1. It is categorical. The tournament charter specifies that hostages will be people the champion would sorely miss, Dumbledore said, mildly. The nature of what Mr. Potter would sorely miss turned out to be more, plural, than the charter anticipated. That's not an explanation, it's entirely an explanation, Dumbledore said. The enchantment that identifies each champion's hostage is non-discretionary. It identified what it identified. If you wish to take issue with the enchantment's assessment of Mr. Potter's emotional priorities, I invite you to write to the Mere-People and lodge your concern. Weatherby looked at Dumbledore with the expression of a man who suspects he's being outmaneuvered and can't find the specific mechanism. What is this? He said. The two girls, there's something between them and the Potter boy that isn't a soul bond, said Bartemius Crouch Sr., from the end of the table. Everyone looked at him. Crouch had been present at the judges' table all morning in a way that was different from his earlier absences. He'd arrived before the task began, looking like a man who'd had very little sleep and even less of whatever other resource had been sustaining him. His face was gray and his eyes were doing something that Harry had been watching carefully and couldn't yet interpret. A 3-point soul bond, Crouch said. His voice was flat, stripped of its usual official precision. He was looking at Harry with an expression that Harry read with the open sensitivity of his core, and felt, underneath it, something that was not official at all. Something personal and very old. The Potter line carries the potential for core sovereignty events. A 3-point bond it is theoretically documented. I was aware, he stopped. You were aware, Dumbledore said, very quietly, that this was a possibility. Crouch looked at Dumbledore. Something passed between the two old men, something that had the weight of a conversation that had happened years ago and was only now reaching its consequence. I knew about Fleamont Potter's research, Crouch said. I knew what the grimoires contained. I assumed, he stopped again. He looked at Harry with an expression that Harry gradually identified as guilt. Not the performative guilt of someone who had been caught, but the real kind, the kind that had been living in a person for a long time and had finally found the moment to come out. I assumed Dumbledore had briefed you. Years ago. He hadn't, Harry said. Crouch looked at his own hands. No, he said. I see that now. There was a long silence at the table. Harry looked at Crouch Sr., at the grey face and the old guilt and the man who had sent his son to Azkaban and then taken him back, carrying that weight for 20 years. Who was, at this moment, unraveling in a way that had nothing to do with the task and everything to do with things that had been breaking in him for a long time. Mr. Crouch, Harry said, and his voice was quiet and direct, the voice he used when he meant every word and wanted that to be clear. Is there something you need to say? To Dumbledore or to me? Right now, while you're here? Crouch looked at him. The grey face got greyer. His hands, folded on the table, were very still. My son, he said. He stopped. He tried again. My son is, Bartemius Crouch Sr., Moody's voice came from behind Harry, and Harry felt it immediately, the cold dark signature flaring, the performed stillness breaking for one instant into something genuine and alarmed. Harry turned. Moody was standing at the entrance to the judge's area, one hand at his flask, the magical eye doing something frantic that the real one wasn't, moving independently, reading the room, calculating. Too fast, Harry thought. He moved too fast when Crouch started talking. He came too fast. He felt Daphne's signal spike. She'd seen it too. She was somewhere in the crowd with Hermione, both of them watching. Hermione's signal had gone sharp and focused in the way it did when she was putting pieces together at speed. "Professor Moody," Dumbledore said, from his chair, and his voice was exactly as warm and mild as it always was. "Come and join us." Mr. Crouch was about to share something. "Moody's real," I went to Dumbledore. To Crouch Sr. To Harry. To Harry it held for one moment too long. And Harry looked back at him, let his core open wider than the careful winter window fraction he'd been maintaining, opened it fully in a single deliberate breath, and read the signature underneath the polyjuice clearly and completely. Crouch Jr. The devoted dark magic. The single cause commitment that had burned away everything else until only the mission remained. He knows I can see him, Harry thought. He can feel me reading him. For a moment, just a moment, something moved in Moody's expression that was not Moody at all. Something that was young and frightened and furious, underneath the 40 years of performance. Something that looked, for that one instant, like a person who had spent so long being devoted to a cause that he'd forgotten he was a person. Then it was gone, and Moody was just Moody again, scarred and gruff and drinking from his flask. Harry looked away. He looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore was looking at him. A communication passed between them that required no words. Harry had identified Crouch Jr. with certainty and Dumbledore knew it, and they both knew that the moment for careful, long-term confirmation strategies had been significantly accelerated by Crouch Sr.'s near confession at the judge's table. Harry looked at Weatherby. "I think we're done here," he said. "The bond is what it is. My scores stand. The task is complete." He stood. "I'll be at dinner if anyone needs an additional statement." He walked away from the judge's table with the specific quality of someone who has decided the conversation is over and is not looking back to check if anyone agrees. He heard Dumbledore's mild voice beginning to re-engage with Weatherby behind him, redirecting, managing, and for once Harry was grateful for it. Let Dumbledore manage Weatherby. That was useful management. He found Hermione and Daphne in the crowd. They were standing together at the edge of the stand's dispersing audience, shoulder to shoulder, which was closer than they'd stood in public before, and both of them looked at him when he came through the crowd with the same expression, which was almost funny given how different their faces normally were. Both reading him. Both assessing. Both carrying the same specific warmth that was the bond's expression of "you're safe," and we felt all of that. "Crouch," Hermione said, immediately, quietly. He was about to say something about his son, Harry said. Moody shut him down by arriving. "We saw," Daphne said. Moody's timing was too precise. "Dumbledore's moving on it," Harry said. "I opened fully in there, I read Crouch Jr. clearly. Dumbledore saw that I had." He looked at both of them. "It's coming to a head. Sooner than June." Neither of them said anything for a moment. Around them the crowd was dispersing, voices everywhere, the noise of the morning's events being processed and reprocessed. Harry heard his own name several times, heard two hostages several times, heard Soul Bond once in a Hufflepuff voice that was excited rather than alarmed. "Your father," Harry said to Daphne. "I know," she said. She looked over her shoulder, and Harry followed her gaze and found the greengrasses in the thinning crowd. Cygnus Greengrass was tall, pale-haired, with the particular quality of bearing that came from generations of people being told they were important. He was looking at Harry with an expression that was complex and controlled and doing a great deal of work to stay controlled. Beside him, Aurora Greengrass, dark-haired where her daughter was fair, with the same very blue eyes, was looking at Harry with something that was less guarded than her husband's and more direct. Daphne was watching her parents watch Harry. "Go," Harry said. She looked at him. "You should come." "In a few minutes," he said. "Go to them first." Give them a minute before I get there. Something moved across her face, the quick, real expression she allowed herself when she wasn't performing composure. All right, she said, quietly. She went. Harry watched her cross the ground toward her parents with that characteristic deliberate walk, and saw the moment she reached them, her father's expression adjusting, recalibrating, not warmly but honestly, the expression of a man taking in new information and finding it more complex than anticipated. She'll be all right, Hermione said quietly, beside him. I know, Harry said. Her father is going to say something strategic and not entirely comfortable. Probably. And she'll handle it. Completely, Harry said. Hermione was quiet. My parents are, they got my letter. They're coming to Hogsmeade this weekend. She looked at her shoes briefly. They don't know anything about soul bonds. They barely know about wizarding customs. I'm going to have to explain. She stopped. I'll come with you, Harry said. She looked at him quickly. You don't have to, Hermione. He said it with the particular directness that had been growing in him since November, the one that didn't apologize for meaning what it said. I'll come with you. To meet your parents. We'll explain it together. Her jaw moved slightly. She pressed her lips together. Looked at the lake, which was back to being an ordinary Scottish body of water in February now that the task was done. They'll ask questions, she said. Many questions. I'll answer them. My mother will want to know if you're treating me properly. A pause. My father will want to know your prospects. I'll tell him I'm planning to survive a Dark Lord and go from there, Harry said. Hermione made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and something else. That's, she started, and then she did laugh, properly, briefly, and it broke something in the careful set of her face into something younger and warmer. That's actually a reasonable answer, she said. My plan is reasonable, Harry said. Your plan is always terrifying and it keeps working, Hermione said, which is the most unreasonable thing about you. She pulled her Gryffindor scarf tighter around her neck. Come meet the Greengrasses. We should be there. They walked toward where Daphne was standing with her parents, and Harry felt both signals simultaneously, Hermione's warm and bright to his left, Daphne's deep and pressurized and currently carrying the specific quality of someone maintaining composure in a family conversation, and thought about what was coming next. Crouch Sr. unraveling. Crouch Jr. behind Moody's face, increasingly aware that he'd been identified. Voldemort at the edge of everything, waiting for June, waiting for the third task. Dumbledore moving faster now, Harry hoped, without the careful management pace he'd been using before. And in the middle of all of it, this. Two women walking beside him and in his chest, the three-point configuration of his grandmother's diagram burning warm and entirely stable, the two fires not competing but burning together in a hearth that had turned out to be large enough after all. He reached the Greengrasses. Cygnus Greengrass looked at him with the expression of a man who had prepared several strategic positions and was deciding which one to lead with. He was taller than Harry, which most adults were, and had the particular quality of presence that came from knowing which rooms you belonged in and having never been told otherwise. Mr. Potter, he said. Mr. Greengrass, Harry said. You've put my family in a complicated position, Cygnus said, directly, which Harry appreciated more than he would have appreciated diplomacy. I didn't plan it, Harry said. Neither did Daphne. Neither did Hermione. He met Cygnus's eyes steadily. If you're asking whether I intend to make it easier for you by pretending it isn't happening, I don't. Cygnus looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in his face, a recalculation, private and quick. You're not what I expected, he said. No, Harry said. The Prophet's coverage isn't accurate, Harry said. It hasn't been since 1981. Another long look. Aurora Greengrass was watching Harry with those very blue eyes, the same eyes as Daphne, but warmer, more immediately present. She looked at her daughter, and then back at Harry, and something in her expression settled from assessment into something more like recognition. "He looks at her the way Cygnus used to look at me," Aurora said, to no one in particular, very quietly. Cygnus looked at his wife. Then at Harry. Then at Daphne, who was watching her father with the composed expression that Harry now read as "I love you and I am not moving on this." Cygnus Greengrass let out a breath that contained most of the strategic positions he'd arrived with. "We should have dinner," he said finally. "When this tournament business is," he paused, looked at the lake, looked at the stands, looked at the specific visual of his daughter standing beside Harry Potter and Hermione Granger in the aftermath of something unprecedented, and seemed to decide that when this tournament business is settled was setting too low a bar. "We should have dinner soon," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "We should." "This weekend," Aurora said firmly, to Cygnus, in the tone of a woman who had been waiting for her husband to arrive at the obvious conclusion and had just decided to provide transportation. "Before they go back to classes." "This weekend," Cygnus agreed, with the specific dignity of a man who had not lost an argument so much as recognized a superior strategic position. Daphne looked at Harry over her father's shoulder, and her face did the thing it did, the quick, real, unperformed expression, just for a moment, just for him. "Thank you," it said, without saying anything at all. He gave her the slight nod that he'd developed for exactly this kind of communication. Hermione, beside him, was watching Aurora Greengrass with the expression of someone reassessing a family she'd been preparing to dislike, finding the preparation had been insufficient. "Mrs. Granger is coming this weekend too," Hermione said suddenly, which surprised herself as much as anyone else, and then continued as though she'd planned it, "and Mr. Granger. Harry's meeting them in Hogsmeade." "Perhaps," she looked at Aurora, then at Harry, with the expression of someone making a decision at speed, "perhaps we should all meet." "A beat." "That would be very efficient," Daphne said, in the perfectly neutral tone that she used when she was pleased about something and not planning to show it. "Hermione's parents are dentists," Harry said, to the Greengrasses, because someone had to say something. "How fascinating," Aurora said warmly, and she clearly meant it, and that was the beginning of something. That night, Harry sat in the chair by the fire in an empty room off the Gryffindor common room that he'd been using for quiet when the dormitory was too loud, and he opened his grandfather's grimoire to the last section of Euphemia's notes, the ones that came after the diagram, the ones he'd been saving, without quite knowing why, for something that felt like the right moment. "We have had this conversation 1,000 times, Fleamont and I, in all its variations, what it is, what it means, where it goes. We have tried to define it with the language available to us and found the language insufficient. Love is the closest word, but it is too small. Bond is technically correct but misses the life of it. I have settled, eventually, on this. It is a choice that keeps choosing itself. Every morning I wake up and it has not diminished and I know I would choose it again, all of it, even the parts that were hard. It was hard. I want whoever reads this to know that. It was complicated and it required honesty in places where dishonesty would have been far easier, and there were months when the collision between the three of us was so acute that I questioned whether love, even this kind, was sufficient. It was. It is. Sufficient and more than sufficient. I do not know who will read this. I do not know when the magic will call this forward again, only that it will, because it is Potter magic and Potter magic is nothing if not persistent. Whoever you are, it is worth it. All of it. The complication and the honesty and the hard parts. Do not be afraid of the size of it. Potestas libera. Love, Euphemia. Harry sat with this for a long time. Outside, the castle was settling into its nighttime sounds. The fire went low. The two signals in his chest were both quiet and warm, Hermione somewhere in the tower above him, probably still making notes about the day, Daphne in the dungeons, probably reading, her signal carrying the specific quality of deep thought that had nothing anxious in it anymore. He thought about the lake. The bottom of it, the cold green dark, both of them tied to the same column, drifting in the slow current. He thought about surfacing. The sound of the crowd, the light, both of them waking in his arms. He thought about what his grandfather had said, a potter who moves with it wins. He was moving with it. He closed the grimoire. He sat in the quiet for a moment with the fire at its embers and both signals warm in his chest and the particular knowledge of someone who has stopped fighting their own nature and found out what their nature actually is. Then he went to bed, because the third task was still coming, and Crouch Jr. was still in the castle, and there was work left to do. But he slept immediately, and he slept well.